Can everyone see my screen?
That looks, yeah, go ahead.
All right. I'm Mike Browning, Product Marketing Manager for Risk IQ at Microsoft. At Risk IQ, prior to our acquisition, I led our public relations efforts and worked with our security researchers to publish our threat intelligence. So by now you've heard all the ways our products enable our customers, or you will hear later today. But I want to share some ways they're used beyond our customer base with a focus on the cybersecurity community, the press, and civil society. Today, I'm going to focus on 4 core areas. 1, informing the cybersecurity community. 2, enabling the analyst community. 3, empowering civil society. And 4, equipping the press. So first off, 1, informing the cybersecurity community. In equipping the community, there's a few things we find really important. So 1 is a strong partnership with the press. At Risk IQ, I was lucky enough to work with really brilliant threat researchers who understand the importance of a strong relationship between the cybersecurity community and the press. For us, our relationship with the press goes beyond just pitching stories. In fact, journalists know they can approach us with questions they may have and get help with following leads or opening new avenues in their investigations. We do this even if it won't lead to coverage for Risk IQ. Ultimately, we know that informing the public and the cybersecurity community is going to make our job easier. Again, I'm lucky to work with researchers and experts like Steve Ginty and Benjamin, who you'll hear on this call. Who's helped support that relationship. They're willing to meet with the press when they have a tight deadline, or they just have a few questions and want help pursuing a lead that they have, or look up some data, and just hop on the phone and talk through some things. So 2, community defense. Threat intelligence drives community defense. Believe that making threat intelligence available and publicly adding to existing threat intelligence with the billions of signals we collect at Risk IQ increases community knowledge and strengthens community defense. And then 3, unique view of the global threat landscape. So at Risk IQ, we often see things others can't, which leads us to unique findings. Our view of the global threat landscape and attack surface has enabled us to add a new perspective to the threat landscape, which enables us to break significant news over the years. So as you've seen so far in this Airlift, and as you will see, Risk IQ technology is uniquely good at a few things, which led us to a few watershed moments for Risk IQ in the press. One thing that we're really good at is threat infrastructure analysis. So our unique data sets enable us to connect threat indicators to unveil the full scope of threat infrastructure in a given attack. In 2021, we did this by using known certificates using the APT29 attack on SolarWinds to uncover a new swath of C2 indicators that gave new context to the attack. We uncovered evidence that 2 servers in the hacker's infrastructure were active the month before it was known that compromised updates first went out. So it's really kind of shifted the narrative and the perspective of this attack in the cybersecurity community. 2, JavaScript threats. We see the components that make up a website, such as the external facing code, really well. Our team saw that JavaScript in the British Airways website was compromised by a then little known group called MageCart, now very well known. It had compromised the credit card information of thousands of customers. We now see MageCart almost everywhere, and the press still come to us to help them analyze new attacks. So in 2018, you see here servicing the MageCart attack on British Airways. 3, understanding global vulnerabilities. So with the pandemic expanding attack services outside of the corporate network and into the homes of employees, we used our unique view of the web to track new vulnerabilities, of which there were a lot. These included remote access vulnerabilities that became a big problem as workers began to work from home, accessing the corporate network remotely, but also other types like those in Exim mail servers. And we were able to really give context to these vulnerabilities and help see their prevalence. So here are a few examples of recent headlines in Wired, Bloomberg, ZDNet, NBC News, and Bleeping Computer. So the second thing is enabling the analyst community. So we believe the cybersecurity community is our best defense. So we enable analysts with free tools and the training they need to use them. Community knowledge. So that's the first thing. Community knowledge is key. The tide, as they say, raises all ships, and the more analysts that have the skills and intelligence they need to tackle threats and investigate threat actors, the safer we all are. 2, unique data sets. So RiskIQ technology collects signals and hard observations from across the global attack surface. They come together in really unique data sets found nowhere else. Example is our host pairs data set, which I'm sure Benjamin will talk a lot about, which show the relationships between elements of different web pages. So connections like these shed new lights on attacks and keeps investigations moving forward. Nurturing threat hunting skills. So skills create a stronger cybersecurity community, especially as the industry faces a skill shortage, which is a pain point for all of us. We've led over 200 workshops across the United States in person and remotely. So again, Benjamin, who you'll hear from soon, he's personally trained more than 10,000 analysts. I think it's actually much more now. And as well as journalists via workshops and in-person coaching. He'll always be there to pick up the phone with somebody who wants to learn more about RiskIQ and our products. You can see these on demand on the RiskIQ website, which I encourage everyone to check out when you get a chance. So on that last point, enabling the analyst community. So RiskIQ has become a go-to resource for threat hunting. We have a community of 100,000 users. It now stretches across the world, adding knowledge to our shared knowledge base as they join. These users add intelligence and indicators to investigations and post and share, they post and share new leads and evidence. So hundreds of public projects. Analysts can publicly collaborate on threat investigations and public projects in RiskIQ community, which also adds to this overall knowledge base. And it's become a resource of thousands of threat investigations around the world. So RiskIQ community is now part of countless workflows, and it's a relied upon resource. And then again, more than 10,000 analysts trained. This is a testament to the work Benjamin and team have done to help analysts most effectively use RiskIQ. On the right here is a great example of an analyst whose work is well known in the community, talking about how RiskIQ datasets push this investigation into some Russian-based cybercrime forward. Here he's sharing it on Twitter to spread the news and kind of contribute to the community discussion, which is great because people will share their findings on Twitter. Others will add to it. They'll take the investigation down different avenues, and it's kind of this hive mind that kind of leads the general community knowledge forward. The third is empowering civil society. We're proud to work with organizations doing pro bono threat hunting to protect vulnerable individuals and communities and defend human rights. We're also proud to give them free, full access to RiskIQ Passive Total and provide full enablement. A great example here is the Citizen Lab, which we've been partnering with for a long time, since 2014. So the Citizen Lab is an interdisciplinary lab based at the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto, Canada. Studies information controls that impact the openness and security of the internet that pose threats to human rights. And it protects dissidents targeted by oppressive regimes. Again, it's relied on RiskIQ intelligence since 2014. So here's an example of them utilizing RiskIQ intelligence in March 2018 in Operation Stealth Falcon. So with Passive Total, the Citizen Lab linked an intrusion attempt on civil rights activists and journalists to infrastructure operated by NSO Group, which is a vendor of commercial spyware for governments, which we're all aware of now. The Citizen Lab leveraged Passive Total's advanced internet data sets and correlation technologies, querying a series of IP addresses used by threat actors targeting human rights activists and journalists. A query returned a related domain, as well as an email address that differed from known Stealth Falcon infrastructure. So pivoting across relevant Passive Total data sets, the Citizen Lab connected the email and domain to a domain that was registered to NSO Group. So suspecting these domains were part of an exploit delivery infrastructure, they began seeking evidence of messages containing links to the network. The investigation led to Apple releasing an out-of-band patch for iOS, as well as an international media coverage of some commercial surveillance products sold exclusively to governments that were used against civil society. So here is a quote from the Citizen Lab. Risk IQ's passive total plays a critical, irreplaceable role in our investigation workflow. We use the tool early and often when trying to understand attacks and when we need to move from specific cases to a better understanding of the infrastructure behind a malicious operation. It has also been incredibly helpful in tracking the infrastructure behind some nation-state disinformation operations. So I want to share two more use cases actually that were recently published. This is another example of how RiskIQ data kind of serves as that connective tissue in these large in-depth investigations and help confirm or contest assumptions that investigators may have and open new avenues in investigations to kind of take down roadblocks and barriers that would otherwise stall or deter researchers who have kind of less sophisticated data sets. So December 2020, running in circles, uncovering the clients of cyber espionage firm Circles. So Circles is a surveillance firm that reportedly exploits weaknesses in the global mobile phone system to snoop on calls, texts, and the location of phones around the globe. It's affiliated with the NSO Group, which develops the oft abused Pegasus spyware. It's used by oppressive regimes to spy on dissidents, essentially. So host names in a Circles registered autonomous system number, ASN, contain the domain name tracksystem.info. So some other leaked documents show Circles employees communicating from @tracksystem.info, an email address related to that domain, indicated that that domain was associated with Circles. So RiskIQ threat intelligence then showed that 17 of the 37 IP addresses pointed to by that domain or its subdomains were in ASNs registered to a Circles Eastern European branch. So again, it just kind of serves as that connective tissue to show that investigators are on the right path so that they can continue to pull these things together to form this broader investigation. So December 2021, another article published by the Citizen Lab, Pegasus vs. Predator, dissidents doubly infected iPhone reveals Citrix mercenary spyware. So 2 dissidents, an exiled politician, and also a host of a popular news show were hacked with Predator spyware, which built and sold by the previously little known mercenary spyware developer Citrix. We're all aware of them now. The politician's phone was simultaneously infected with both Citrix's Predator and NSO Group's Pegasus spyware, operated by 2 different government clients. So obviously this dissident was targeted by governments all over the place. The Citizen Lab conducted internet scanning for Predator spyware servers and found likely Predator customers in several countries around the world. RiskIQ intelligence showed that the certificate returned for an IP address of interest was related to Predator, indicating that it belonged to Citrix. Again, just pushing that investigation forward, making those connections with those observations that we make across the global attack surface. So actually, Citrix was reported to be of Intellexa, the so-called Star Alliance of spyware, which was formed to compete with the NSO Group, and which has described itself as the, quote, EU-based and regulated with 6 sites and R&D lab throughout Europe, end quote. So obviously a large and sophisticated operation. One more quote from the Citizen Lab. Tools like RiskIQ help us punch above our weight. Its ease of use, rich data set, and ongoing evolution of its features make it an excellent tool for our research and a benchmark that we compare other options against. So the 4th area here is equipping the press. As I mentioned above, we're really proud to work with the press and do investigations and research on behalf of journalists, but many journalists are now doing this themselves. Many of today's journalists have sophisticated skills and are threat hunters in their own right. We love this dynamic. It feeds into our view of community defense. The more journalists that can conduct digital investigations, even basic ones, the deeper the community knowledge gets, and the safer we all become. All right, another use case here from the Columbia Journalism Review. The CJR sees RiskIQ as a modern reporting tool that helps reporters investigate digital clues and complement their more traditional offline techniques. So the CJR describes themselves as the intellectual leader in the rapidly changing world of journalism. It's also described itself as the most respected voice in press criticism, shaping the ideas that make media leaders and journalists smarter about their work. So it's essential for journalists and also the thousands of professionals in communications, technology, academia, and other fields relying on solid media industry knowledge. The CJR recently included Risk IQ in its Who's Behind This Website, a checklist, which is a reporting tool to help journalists and researchers when trying to find out who published a website, which should be used in conjunction with the more offline reporting techniques, the more traditional techniques. So here's another case study from October 2021, which was when they were shining light on Metric Media. So Metric Media, created in 2019, it's a network of over 1,200 sites across the 50 states and Washington, D.C., news sites, and claims to be the largest producer of local news in the United States. It launched its quote-unquote community newsmaker in 2020, using the language of citizen journalism. However, what appeared to be grassroots news is actually part of a sprawling network that promotes political agendas and corporate interests without disclosing those ties to the public. The Columbia Journalism Review used RiskIQ's passive DNS and SSL certificate data to establish and expose shady connections within the Metric Media Community Newsmaker network to advocacy groups. So basically, RiskIQ helped them establish a full view of the network of these dubious sites that have shoddy reporting, and at best it's shoddy, and at worst it's fake news, and tie them to political parties, special interest groups, and the lobbyists behind them. Another case study from August 2020, they're quote-unquote pink slime news outlets, which were rapidly proliferating in the election run-up. So November elections in the US produced new networks of shadowy, politically backed local news websites designed to promote partisan talking points and collect user data. These rapidly proliferating sites generated automated, again, substandard, low-cost stories. And the Columbia Journalism Review used RiskIQ data sets to link together, these seemingly disparate websites belonging to these local news outlets. They relied heavily on our internet observations to establish kind of this full scope and the effect that they may be having, especially on the election. Little quote from them: "We are grateful to Farsight Security and RiskIQ for access to their tools, without which our research would not be possible." So users of RiskIQ Passive Total in the press go far beyond Columbia Journalism Review. We're also proud to provide full Passive Total access to individual members of the press. Many journalists have attended RiskIQ cyber threat workshops, or have had individual sessions with Benjamin or Steve Ginty, who show them how to query certain data sets and perform their own investigations in Passive Total. So through outreach and collaboration, we've enabled more than 20 journalists from Reuters, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, Daily Beast, and many more. And we've seen Passive Total leveraged in the coverage of the 2020 election, nation state activity, cybercrime related to COVID-19, and a lot of other topics. Again, here are a few examples of the stories published kind of independently, leveraging RiskIQ telemetry. So by reporters that we enabled, without any, kind of hands-on work from us. This is just from reporters doing their own investigation after we've enabled them with RiskIQ Passive Total. This includes, Cuts and Motherboard, the Wall Street Journal, and ZDNet. Topics including spyware, the SolarWinds hack, misinformation, and more nation-state activity. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for coming out this morning. If you have any questions about the work that we do with these organizations or the press, you can email me here, and happy to provide more info.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's certainly a lot of information. I want to go back through and read a few of those articles and catch up myself. Thank you for sharing all that great information. Again, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A, and all of our speakers will be continuing to monitor that and reply back to your questions if you would like to ask anything live. Next up is Mr. Benjamin Powell. We're going to get some real use cases and understand exactly how you can use this information in your day-to-day work. Over to you.
Hey, let me start my presentation. So, hey, Mike, thank you for those kind words and for letting us know how our information is making the internet a safer place and empowering everyone to do more, especially the journalists, to go out and find these things. So today what I'm going to talk about in this presentation are the security challenges that we all face in real life. What we're going to talk about is, what is attack surface management, what is threat intelligence, and how we help customers become smarter, faster, and to become more secure in their environments. So if we take a look at threat intelligence, it's really important to understand how this is viewed in the world. And what Gartner says is that adversary threat infrastructure and malicious systems capable of deploying cyber attacks, whether operated by one or many or thousands of actors, that's what they define as what you really need to worry about. And what I'm going to try to show today is, as we go through the demos later on, I'm going to try to show you each one of these things and how we do that, and how we can find the one thing or the many things, or starting from one and showing you many things, or starting from something bad and going to and finding more bad, or starting from good and finding the bad things that are attacking it, all from the direct observations that we have. And we're unique to that because we're gathering all this data, and because we gather the data, we understand how the relationships work with each other. So we're going to show how you take this information to become smarter and faster in your environment. Now, when you think about the security challenges that we're facing with threat intelligence, everything is moving to the cloud. People are making that migration, whether intentional or non-intentional. So, for example, there might be shadow IT. There might be somebody that says, "Hey, we're just going to spin this up for this engagement," and that's an exposure. That's something that maybe you might not even know about. But the unique thing about Risk IQ is, as we gather the data, you don't install anything. We've already gathered all of it. We've already built the relationship maps and understand how everything plays together, because we all play on the same battlefield. We're all on the same internet. And we're looking at these observations and linking things together based upon how we're communicating to them. And we're experiencing the internet as a user. So we bring down that full document object model. We know how everything interacts. So what we're trying to do is to allow you to adapt your defenses based on live, on-demand threat observations. This is not a feed. It's nothing like that. It's things that we're actually seeing now. And because we're doing it every day, we know the first time we saw it and we know the last time we saw it. So, for example, if there was a vulnerability out there and it was in a particular version of software, we could know when that was seen first and when it was patched. So we're able to look at that at a global scale, but also at an organizational scale or a third party that you might rely upon. So we want you to be able to understand all of your risks and exposures, and to take that information and to put it into action. You can bring that in and patch. You can call your third-party vendors that you work with and say, "I see this vulnerability there." And this is without any scanning on your part. It's just information that we've already gathered that is publicly available to anybody. Now, once we understand those vulnerabilities, we're able to prioritize those based upon the exploitation. So, for example, think of it this way. If there's a vulnerability that's out there, and there's deep and dark web chatter about it, and there's a known exploit about it, that's really critical. And if you have it, hey, it's really critical. And if you rely upon a business to do your payment processing or something critical for your organization, that could be critical to you as well. And to be able to have that visibility and to know whether you're affected or not by something very quickly is incredible. And we'll go through a scenario where an executive comes up and says, "I read about this vulnerability. Do we have it? How big is it in the world? And does any of our third parties have it?" And we're going to show you how you can answer that. Now, with the other piece that's really good is that we have this durable, sustainable protection for you. So think of it this way. If we know where the bad guys live, so we know their domains and IPs and the tools that they use, and we're constantly updating that. If you take that information and you tell your internal systems or your endpoints, you can't communicate with this bad infrastructure, you've basically inoculated yourself from some of these threats. So as they change over time, and we're fingerprinting these bad guys, and we're finding out based upon what's installed and what's running and their certificates, and maybe something unique that ties that together to create this fingerprint of this bad infrastructure that might be shared by many people, or one particular one, we're able then to publish that information to you, that you can take it and protect your organization. And then you can even look to see if there's any traffic going to and from these places to really know if you're affected or not. Now, most of the breaches, 50% of the breaches, originate with something third party. Think of Target. You know, they were breached because an HVAC vendor, somebody got in, and from there they went to the POS system and they installed their skimmers. So because we're relying on so many things upon things that are outside of your control, hosted by many different providers, you need to be able to understand the risks and exposures that brings into your organization, because we're all moving to the cloud. And we're able to show you how you look and how others look, apples to apples comparisons. So it gives you the visibility and the understanding of how you look, how others look, an adversary, an ally, a third party, the same way. So then you can take action. Now, when you think about external attack surface management, that is how you look on the internet. So this is all the freely public available data that's out there. We're just gathering it. We're doing over 2 billion web requests a day to go out there and understand this information, and then tracking those changes over time to understand how it is right now and how it is days from now, when maybe a patch came out and people are starting to deploy that. We can see how fast it's going. We can look at different sectors, different locations around the world, and see what those vulnerabilities are, what those trends are, and what's happening. So the assets such as servers, websites, clouds, applications, domains, the code, like the JavaScript that's actually running on the sites, the content not directly managed or controlled by a customer, but could affect you. So you might rely upon some piece of code that's coming from another site, and we're able to look at that and potentially say, oh, what you're loading, they were compromised, and now that comes in, and that's like the Mage card. So the credit card skimmer, like British Airways was loading something from another site on their real site. So if they scanned their site to see if anything was there installed, it wasn't. It was a link to something bad, and that only executed when that code comes down to the workstation of the person. So when they're on their browser and they bring it up, it's building that page, images from Facebook, for example, sending data to Google for analytics, and bringing in that malicious code. And so we're capable of finding these things that no one else has. And because of we're gathering that data, we understand the context and those host pairs, the parent-child relationship between all of those components coming in and out. So when you think about the challenges that are facing external attack surface management, understanding where everything is, understanding whether you know about something or not, taking that information and making it that is highly available and accessible to the people that need it, helps with the skill shortage, because everybody's trying to do more with less. And this shift where it's not only a targeted attack, but more of a spray and pray type of attack, where it's a big net that's cast out through a bot trying to see how they get in. Understanding where those risks and exposures are globally, organizationally, and third party are highly valuable to organizations. And with the move to 5G and IoT and having devices directly on the internet that you can then understand your how your SCADA and different things are operating, the IoT type of things, or your smart lights or different things are highly desirable to understand, because that's potential vectors for attack. And the third-party dependencies are so important to understand and get that visibility. And today, most organizations will have to pick up the phone and call and ask the question, do you have this or not? And they'll have to reply or rely upon that information. But now you'll have the tools and the capability to quickly understand if that is there or not from the outside perspective. And if so, if they really fixed it or not. Because as that code changes, our system will show that that software has been updated, and you'll know that the new version is there. So it gives you peace of mind. Now, when we look at how we bring this information in, we're understanding the entire internet. And with that, we can show you and others, good and bad, adversaries and allies. So we see that adversary threat infrastructure. And as we were going through and building these maps, what we found was highly, we didn't really realize this at the time, was a lot of these threat actors share infrastructure. They might use a hosting provider that doesn't take them offline if they're doing something bad. If they get a cease and desist, they might be in an area of the world where they go, well, we don't really care. We're not going to take them down. Or they might be using free providers and abusing those types of environments to do bad. So we're able to understand, the infrastructure, how the threat actors are working, the vulnerabilities and exposures that they're attacking, and where those are in the world, and allow you to do on-demand investigations to build your own threat intelligence that might be based upon an article that was published a few months ago, but there's new infrastructure that might have come to life now that you can take and bring into your organization to see if anybody's communicating with it, and if so, do your extended detection and response to eliminate those things. So these are automated ways that we're gathering and we're processing this information to give you the direct observations of what's occurring on the internet day by day. So then you have an intelligent security mechanism to apply that to all of your infrastructure, to your security products, to understanding, how things are changing. You can even look at the information and see, if you have a competitor, how are they look in the world? What vulnerabilities do they have? How are they growing? So there's more information in here than just the security aspect. It's because it's the entire internet and we're all on that same playing field. And the threat investigations and the forensics that you'll be able to glean and understand, you'll be amazed as we go through some of these exercises. So when you think about it, there's two sides of a coin or a ball. So on one side is the infrastructure. This is the assets. This is the understanding how things are changing, the observations of risks and exposures, the third party supply chain issues that you might have. And then the other side is the threat intelligence, the bad actors, the hacktivists, the nation states, the malicious infrastructure that's out there. And merging that together to give you all that information gives you complete understanding of what's out there, how is it changing, and how it could affect you and others. So when you think about security, we're the other endpoint out there. Okay, so there's two sides. So there's the device side, and this is what we're used to as security professionals, because we own and control the infrastructure and all the equipment, and we control the people and the processes. So with that, if you started off and there was something bad, you had endpoint protection that might look at the malware analysis, some threat intelligence around it, and some response, and you would push that out to all of your devices, to your endpoints, to protect them all. But you need to see one bad thing. There has to be one bad victim. And then once you understand that, then you take that knowledge and you protect everybody else. But one person needs to fall victim so it can be analyzed. And then after that, everybody's protected. Now on the digital side, Risk IQ can take that infrastructure, we understand it, We know about the attack surface, we've graphed all the relationship, and we understand these global threat indicators, and we're able then to push that out. So we have that knowledge that you can take and now have that inside-outside view of the world. So we're marrying those two together to give you full understanding of what's happening. So when you think about what the capabilities of Risk IQ brings you, attack surface intelligence. We're able to tell you about any organization and understand all the pieces that make that together. And we do that through infrastructure chaining, and I'll explain that in the demos in the next presentation. So we're able to uncover how everything is interconnected in the world. Now, once you have that information, you want to take action with it. You can do an investigation in the workbench and understand what's happening, but then you want to take that information and put it someplace else. You want to be able to take that threat intelligence and make your systems smarter, make them faster, make the people that are using those systems work at a higher level, knowing that, oh, that IP address that's on the outside world has been involved in phishing and this threat actor group. And it just came into your organization and it was associated with an email that somebody opened. The person will go, okay, I need to block it. I need to take action. But if you didn't have that information, they're going to have to maybe give it to a level 2 person to go out there and do that part of the investigation to find out if this is really good or bad. So we're trying to take that information and push it into the systems. And you're going to see that when we do some Sentinel demos to show you how that works. Now, the cyber threat intelligence that we have is the fingerprinting that we're doing on the adversaries, but also the tooling and infrastructure that they're using. So Cobalt Strike, for example, pen testers use it to be able to go test their organization to make sure that they're secure by trying to get in. Well, that software has been leaked and cracked, and the bad guys are using it as well. So if you're not using Cobalt Strike, or if you do, you're limiting, the IPs that can talk to you from that. But if you knew where every one of those instances were in the world, you could protect yourself from the threat actors that are using it. And so this is what we're trying to bring to you, is not only the tactics, techniques, and procedures that somebody's doing, but the actual direct observations of where they're living and the tools that they're using, so then you can take that knowledge and apply it internally to protect your organization. Now, the third-party intelligence that we have is the apples-to-apples comparison. So this is a non-curated view of an attack surface. Everything that is associated with an organization, showing those relationships, what's installed, what's running, where they are in the cloud, if they're using GPC, they're using Azure, they're using AWS, they might be using Rackspace, wherever it is. We're showing you the distribution of where it is and giving you the context when you're looking at an attack surface to say, was there any open source threat intelligence published that mentioned anything associated with that attack surface? So think of it this way. Hundreds of articles get published a day. But if I tell you, hey, there was an article published that you should read because it talks about an IP or a domain or a piece of code that's running that's in your environment or in a third party that you rely upon, you might go, oh, that's something I really need to know and understand. So we're able to take the threat intelligence and filter with the external attack surface to give you that full understanding of that context to say, is it important to be in my organization, and is it a risk or exposure that I really need to look at? Now, the vulnerability intelligence, this is the way that the threat actors are getting in. So if you understand where all those vulnerabilities are in the world, you understand about which ones have known exploits, and how that applies to every organization. Now that gives me a way of filtering those over 250,000 vulnerabilities that are out there to know which ones are important to me, which ones should I prioritize, and which ones we need to take action right now. And that's what we're going to try to show you. So when you look at the threat intelligence, we have open source intelligence. So these could be articles like Mike had shown. Now, what is unique about Risk IQ is we go out there, we grab all these open source intelligence articles, and we bring them in. If you've ever read them before, sometimes they're published with nice indicators of compromise to show like IPs and domains. Other times they're kind of sticky. They're in an image. You can't copy and paste it. You might have to type it again. Well, we go out there and we scrape them all out. So we make them immediately available that you can click on and expand and understand. So we're taking that information and making it available that we can take it and apply it to your attack surfaces to understand if you're susceptible or not. Now, we're going out there and talking to every IP address in the IP4 space. We're doing port scanning. We're grabbing all this information that when we bring it back in, it's from actual direct observations. It's not a feed. We're not buying anything. We're not relying upon anybody else. We're gathering this data ourselves, and we understand how we gathered it and when we gathered it. So this gives us the capability of understanding, what's installed, what's running, where these exposures are in the entire world, so we can prioritize the vulnerabilities and the insights for you to say, hey, out of all these things that are out there, these are the ones that you really need to focus on now. Now, we're also tracking, the malware and the phishing out there. And we're going to go through some phishing examples and some business email compromise examples. So you'll be able to see from that one single indicator, we can say, oh, that malware was on this IP. That IP had this cert. That cert was associated with this domain that had another IP. And we're building out this infrastructure chain so you have the whole complete understanding of that threat. So you might have only seen one piece, but we can tell you that full complete set that you need to take action on. Now, we're also looking at emerging threats and infrastructure. So as these threat actors change, every time we publish or a journalist publishes something about a threat actor, they might burn their infrastructure and move somewhere else. Well, we're constantly changing and looking. And if we find any link to them, we're able to quickly understand, oh, this is part of this other threat that was out there. And we take that information and move forward. Now, this gives you the capability of doing advanced searching and hunting. So you can take something internally that has a domain or IP that you've seen from the outside world, and then get a full understanding of that. And to be able to graph that out either for the entire world, for the globe, or to get the individual perspectives of how it appears, allows you to really have that complete understanding of the risks and exposures. Now, this information is highly portable. We have APIs and integrations where that data can go out to other systems. And I'm going to be showing you the integration with Sentinel later. Now, for the external attack surface management, we're going out there and we're understanding the attack surface, the vulnerabilities, how things are changing because we're doing it daily, the infrastructure that's being used by the threat actors, able to take that and apply global protections internally from that knowledge and encode this into your security allows you to not only graph and identify what's out there, but to get these fingerprints of what these bad guys are and apply them automatically to do detections, to find new threats that might be coming in, or to create your own threat intelligence that maybe no one has known that this is part of something, and then apply that globally to your organization to protect it. And that's what we're going to do. So you'll be able to enrich Sentinel data, for example, by running Risk IQ playbooks that will use the API to go out and say, this IP domain, tell me more about it. Tell me if it's malicious or suspicious and why. And let me know if there's any open source intelligence about it. Enable me to understand, is this something that's in my attack surface and somebody else's, and give you that information. This is what we're going to be demonstrating today. Now, we're also, and here's an example, here's like a screenshot showing some of the playbooks that have run and are in the comment section. So you'll be able to automatically triage incidents. So getting that junior person to function at a higher level. If you know it's bad and it came in, you're going to block it. You're going to isolate the computer. You're going to block it on the firewall. You're going to do some cleanup and some investigation around that. And you're going to be able to prioritize which ones to look at. So if you had a whole bunch of incidents that came in that had external entities, you probably want to take care of the ones first that you know are malicious. And so we can automatically prioritize those and say, take care of these first, then look at these. And it's pretty straightforward, and you'll be able to see that. So if you can, we'll be doing private previews later on of our new tools coming out, and this is where you sign up for that. Now, one thing I would like to ask you is if you like to watch one of our previous workshops where every single workshop is entirely new scenarios on different themes, you can go out to riskiq.com/threat-hunting workshops, and this is where you can sign up for future workshops or watch past ones or go to our YouTube channel. And then if you'd like to learn more and to start using the RiskIQ free community edition, you can go out to community.riskiq.com/learn-more/illuminate. And there you can sign up. And if you sign up using your corporate email address, we'll actually show you your external attack surface. And we will give you higher level of queries and data sets that are available to give you that understanding of how the world looks through different perspectives. Now, what's important is if you use a corporate email address, we'll vet you to say, hey, you're actually a threat investigator, and we give you more access. If you use a Gmail or a free email provider, we don't give you that same level of access. And the reason for that is, with great knowledge comes we have to be very protective of who has access to this and what they can do, because there's great power with this knowledge that we have, and we don't want this power to go into the wrong hands. We're trying to make the world a safer place, and we're trying to empower everyone and every individual at an organization to do more and understand more, to reduce the risks and exposures that everyone is facing. And so with that, I'm done with this part of the presentation. And are there any questions that came in that I need to answer now, or should we continue on?
Yeah, you can continue on. Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Let's do the next one. And again, any questions, please do use the Q&A. We will answer them, and we'll address them with Ben as well. Thank you.
Okay. So this deck that I'm going to go through, certain areas of the deck, I've recorded some scenarios, and the reason why I recorded them is because I put some pop-ups and some things around the important areas to look at. And so when I go through the Sentinel demos, I've recorded them, and they're full investigations. So what I did was I started off like what you would see in the product, how you would go out and what you would do, even down to the remediations that you would do in a particular case. So I wanted to make this in a way that in the future, if you we're talking with partners, if you wanted to go out and talk to somebody, you could actually just play the video and talk over it like what I'm going to do. Now, these demo things that we're going to show will be in Contosa hotels. So you'll be able to do this. They're in the process of getting these live for everyone to use, and they should be live in the May timeframe. The information that RiskIQ deals with is real. So the things I'm going to be showing and talking about are really bad stuff. So it is not a fake site. It's not they're not sites that are bad that we're in control of. So we want to use our best judgment when we are investigating these things to have an air gap between you and what we're looking at. And you want to use a tool for that doesn't bring that thing directly down to your machine, but it brings it to a place where it's safe and we're viewing it in a safe environment. So we have an air gap between you and the bad thing, and that also protects you from the threat actor knowing that you're investigating them. And these journalists, for example, that are doing these investigations, they're protected because we've already gathered the data, and now you're looking at the data on our side. And so just bear that in mind as we go through. I'll let you know about those things. So today, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to quickly go over that slide, the security challenges that we're facing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into the demos. Now, before we go into the demos, I'm going to explain how we get the data and what we're doing with it to be able to come up with these observations and to tell you this information. So when you're thinking about the threat intelligence, and I'm just going to build this up again because we just talked about in the last presentation, we're all going and using things in the cloud more and more and more. And that's the trend where, if you're running Sentinel inside or you're running Sentinel in the cloud, you might have a couple people that are just maintaining Sentinel internally. But if you move that resource out to the cloud, you can use those people potentially to go out and do investigations. So there is a huge swing to do more things in the cloud to protect the organization because they're patched more frequently generally, and they're protected a little bit more than an organization can do unless they have a 24-hour shop, and that's kind of hard sometimes. Now, the vulnerabilities and exposures are more of it's very easy for a threat actor to understand where that vulnerability is in the world, and whether it's a target attack or a bot attack where it's software going out there trying to infect everybody that has this piece. It's really important to understand where those things are and where you need to prioritize to protect the organization right away. Now, that threat actor infrastructure, we're going to go through some of that. And once you start to identify and see it, you can take that knowledge and then start applying controls internally to inoculate the organization. And then we also need to focus on the third parties. So you might have the best security in the world, but you might rely upon something that another vendor is providing to you. Or it could be a resource on a web page that you rely upon that you might not even know about. And they might have a vulnerability that affects your customers and will ultimately affect you. So you need to be able to understand the complete lay of the land. So remember, threat intelligence, and what Gardner looks at is that an adversary threat infrastructure, there are malicious systems capable of deploying a cyber attack, whether operated by one or many. And I'm going to show that to you, and we're going to go through that. And we already went through this slide. So we're going to look at the attack surfaces. We're going to look at taking that information out and bringing it into another product, which is going to be Microsoft Sentinel. We're going to look at that threat infrastructure and see how we can take that fingerprint of that infrastructure or the tooling that they're using and see how I can scale my defenses with it. Taking that third-party data that we understand, the apples-to-apples comparison, you and others, good and bad, adversary and ally, and how you look on the world, and be able to apply the vulnerability intelligence on top of that to say, this is where you need to fix things right away, and understand the true risk to your business. And we're going to be looking at open source intelligence, malware, direct observations, the vulnerability prioritizations, the emerging threat infrastructure, and then doing some advanced threat hunting that we're going to go through live and recorded to be able to show you the best way to protect the organization and take that worldwide view and apply it to your internal systems. Okay? And then with the external attack surface management, we're going to be able to show and track when things have been patched, when the vulnerability was there, how big is this vulnerability in the world, and whether you have it or somebody else has it. So the nice thing is that we all play on the same battlefield. We're all on the internet. And with that, if you are looking at the signals and you're capturing those signals, then you're able to understand about these threat actors because they're trackable. So it's like, if a tree falls in the woods, if someone's there, they can hear it. If no one's there, no one hears it. So we want to try to gather as much of this information as possible and put it together where it's all connected. So then you know this piece is related to this piece. So for example, if a threat actor gets on the internet, they're going to have an IP address, a net block, an autonomous system number, and they're going to use an internet service provider. They have to be on the internet. So that initial connection, there's some signals. Now, when they create an email, they're going to use an email provider. It might be Gmail. It might be Hotmail. It might be their own hosted exchange server. It could be anything. But there'll be a subject, a message body. There's some headers in there. There's maybe an attachment. Maybe it's an HTML email, and there'll be a timestamp of when that email was created. So you might know where it is in the world based upon the time that it was. Now, when they mail that email, it has to cross the internet. And when it crosses the internet, there's transit IPs. It's going to go through different transit net blocks and ASNs, and there'll be times where it's associated when it went through the different parts of the internet. Now, when the email is received, if it's HTML, they could run some code to fingerprint your machine, to know if you read it or not. It will understand your server's IP address of where that email was, or your host name or host IP if it's running code, and maybe even your gateway IP address that you're using, and then your location, because if I have your IP address of where you are in the outside world when it came in, I can look it up and find out where in the world that is. And then some binaries might execute if you open up an attachment or something. There might be some dependencies that get pulled in from different places. You might click on things. There might be some redirects inside of that email. And then when you're compromised, they'll be on your network. They'll be able to maybe traverse to different machines. They'll access the net blocks and the system, and maybe other things to drop your credentials from your machine. So there's a lot of TTPs there. So all of these things that happen are really important. And because we're on the internet, if we're collecting these things internally and externally, we'll get a complete picture and understanding of what's happening. So using a system like Microsoft Sentinel to gather all of these facts, that once something comes in, what happened and how did it communicate to the outside world, is highly advantageous to fully understand your risks and exposures and be able to take that information and apply protections to all. So as we're going out there and collecting this information, we understand about the JavaScripts, the certificates, the banners that when we go talk on the different ports to see what's there, the results of those banners, the open source intelligence articles, the articles that we create and publish, the DNS, the IP address that was associated with a domain name at a particular time. We're bringing down that full document object model from the client perspective and understanding what's coming in and what's going out to everything. Mobile applications, we actually go out to over 200 different mobile app stores around the world, download the mobile apps and understand all the pieces inside and how those function as well. The WHOIS data, we have over 11 years of WHOIS data. So some of that information hasn't been privacy protected because we collected it so long ago. We understand the response bodies, all that. So as that data comes in, we have data scientists that we have petabytes of data, over 10 petabytes. Now, we have security researchers and threat investigators that when they figure something out, they can go to the data scientists and say, hey, this combination of things is this tool. This threat actor is doing this and that. And they'll create these models that as the data comes in, so every day we have the data that we collected, we merge it from all the history of data that we had prior. So with that, it's not like if we set a rule or set a detection, it's from this point forward. We can roll that detection back to the beginning of time that we've collected data and roll it forward, or create an entire new data set. So for example, cookies. We did an investigation about Turla, which was how the Russians, threat actors, were using satellite dishes to steal data from people. So basically, they would set up a satellite dish that was a real IP address of somebody. So they would find a service provider that had this IP address. And then they set up their own satellite dish. And when they would do the attacks, it would go up into the satellite and they would pull it out of the sky. The organization that really had that IP address, when it came down to them, would go, I didn't ask for this data, and it would just be dropped. And so what we found out was a cookie that was on all of the infrastructure associated with this was able to identify it all with a single click. So we then created cookies and we rolled it back, and then we found all this other infrastructure that was associated that we never knew existed. So it's like the Wayback Machine or Time Machine that we can go back and roll this forward. So we have the full document object models, we have the WHOIS data, the passive DNS, all the crawl data, the certificates, every certificate in the world going back 11 years, understanding all the relationships, all of the facets inside there. So if you can't find stuff in GDPR, you can probably find good data inside the certificate and link those together. The web component, so this is like what's installed and running on the domain, the trackers, the little bits of code that are running. So if somebody duplicates your website, they might be duplicating your Google Analytic codes, for example. And by searching on your own code, you might find infrastructure that has been duplicated and is out there that you don't even know about, that could be in the setup and weaponization phase prior to the attack. And so we have derived data sets as well. So when you think about the internet, the inside and the outside, where we're focusing on the outside the firewall. So if you're looking at the MITRE attack framework, the reconnaissance, the resource development, and the initial access is generally where we're focused, okay? Now, when you're looking at the cyber kill chain, when someone's in the discussion, the planning, the recon, the setup, the weaponization, this is where we're functioning. And then on the inside, this is where we have those protections with the endpoint and other things where we're looking at, when it got delivered, are we scanning the emails? Are we looking at the content when someone's trying to go out someplace? Are we looking at the endpoint to see when something gets detonated, if there was anything bad in there? That's all in the internal pieces. And so Risk IQ has that external component. So think of it this way. If somebody's talking about attacking your organization or asking if there's any compromised systems inside your organizations, we can start telling you about it. Now, when somebody registers a typo squatted domain, it's not illegal, but we're able to see it and let you know that, hey, there's a domain with your name inside of it that you should be aware of. That domain might get parked. And once it gets parked, it doesn't mean that it's bad. You can't tell them to cease and desist because they might be able to use that. It's okay. But once that system becomes email capable and it starts having your logos on there or looking like your website, then you could get that taken offline. You can have lawyers get involved or Risk IQ or others involved to do that takedown request. Now, we're able that if we mark something as, if you're a customer of ours and you say, hey, this is domain infringement of my organization, once we block it, when we put it into our block list, Google and Microsoft put it in place within 10 to 15 minutes. So then you get the red screen on your browser saying, hey, this is a bad site. Do you really want to go there? It might still be online, but your 90% of the world's browsers won't go there. So we're able to do that. And then the takedown could take 1 to 4 days for them to physically take those things down. And then once something comes in, you have that instant where you can now start, blocking and doing things internally. Now, we continually monitor these things. So as it's taken down, it's like whack-a-mole. It might come up again. And they might change domains. But I'm going to show you a way that some things don't change with these attacks. They're trying to look like you. So if I can look at your stuff, I can tell you everywhere that your stuff's being used in the world. You can potentially start blocking these things right away and prevent them from ever getting in the first place. So that's some of the use cases we're going to do. So remember, if you start off with that single piece of data that you might see from your internal system, like that piece of malware, you might say, oh, that malware was on this IP with this cert, and that domain is associated when we're building out this infrastructure chain. So we have the complete understanding of that threat in the world, okay? So when you think about this, what I'm going to be showing you are real threats, real bad things. We don't have any fake data in our system. So these are direct observations that Risk IQ has. So the lawyers rule the world, so be careful. Do not go to these IP addresses directly. Do not go to these domains directly or these URLs. They are bad and they could cause harm to you and your organization. So just bear that in mind. So when we're doing these things, if you see a URL, you see an IP, don't type it into your browser and go there. You need to use a tool that protects you and your organizations with an air gap, that the data goes into that system and you're viewing that system and it's not in your organization. Okay, so bear that in mind. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, it's an entity enrichment use case where we're going to run this, and we're going to go through and I'm going to show it to you. Okay, now this is the scenario. The scenario is a business email compromise. So what this means is that somebody is targeting a user inside the system where they want to steal the email that maybe where the payment is going to go. Like if you're selling something, and if they can send the bank information to your real customer to say, hey, instead of sending to this particular place, send it here, send it to this new bank. Okay, so they're trying to get into the system so they can get into the email, so then they can go and do damage to the company by stealing their money. And so we're going to go through this together. So what I did was I recorded this one because it's really important, and I wanted to have pop-ups to bring your attention to certain areas, and I'm going to walk through this particular one. But the nice thing is that if you're a partner, this is going to be in our online system, but also these recordings will be available that you can actually use this as a step-by-step walkthrough. And we're going to have a solution brief with this as well, where it will be documented so you can have a nice deliverable that you can give, or use that as your step-by-step guide to be able to do this on your own live. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second, and I'm going to bring up my video, and we're going to do this together. So give me a second. Okay, so here we go. So I'm in Sentinel, and I am looking at my system here. Okay, so here are my incidents. So if you take a look, there's an incident here, financial fraud, business email compromise. Okay, so on the right-hand side, I'm going to go into the full details. Okay, so quick thing I want to bring your attention to. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, we created a group in Sentinel, and we said these are all the people that are in the finance department. So if you get any incident concerning any one of these users, we want you to call it a VIP user. So then it's going to take higher priority, because we know with these business email compromise, this is the group of people that they're going after. So we want to make sure that we put a tag in there, so then the people that are working the incident understand that this is something that is really important to work on. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So when we take a look at the comments in here, all of a sudden it's been automatically enriched. So we had playbooks that would run to enrich on any indicators that are from the outside. So in this particular case, it's saying, hey, there was a domain, okay, that came up from this user, and that domain was actually malicious, okay, and it was observed phishing on this entity. So right away we know, okay, I'm going to have to take action on this. So the person working at the SOC that's going through and doing these incident response stuff all the time is really easy now, because they have all the information. They don't have to go and ask somebody, is this domain okay? It looks okay. Is it bad? They have all the knowledge right here because these playbooks ran, okay? Now, we know it's malicious now, so now I know I'm going to have to do some action, some remediation with it. Now, the middle section is the information that talks about when we query the system, I can get summary data back. So when we get into the actual workbench where we're going to do this investigation, these are the tabs of data that came back. So there's 523 resolutions, 15 certificates, 61 trackers. So this tells me how many results came back. And there's a direct link that from here I can click on it and go directly into the workbench if I need to do further investigation. So this gives me that jump off point that I can go directly there. Okay. So we're going to continue down just a little bit more, and then the IP address, because with DHCP, the IP address might be hosting many things, so it's unknown. We don't know if it's good or bad, but it had a self-signed certificate and a very new certificate on top of it. So those are like things that were suspicious. And once you get like 3 or 4 suspicious things, it might be, oh, that's enough for me to say, hey, this is bad. Okay. And then there was an article that was published, and the article mentioned that domain that the user went to that talks about Vagabond Fish Kit, an example of shared code modularity. So we know that, hey, this is part of a fish kit that's out there. Okay, just from this summary data, just from the playbook that ran and put it into the system. So this is a visualization of the enrichment that you can immediately take with RiskIQ. Okay, so now that I have this here, I need to do some further things to understand what's really happening. Okay, so now I'm looking at these entities. Okay, I know that it's Kate Dickens on Contoso. I have the IP addresses. I'm going to go into the alert, and then I'm going to run some queries to find out some additional information about what maybe happened on the machine. Okay, did she actually click on it? Did anything happen on her computer? So I'm just grabbing the domain. Okay, and from that now I'm going to run some queries. Okay, so I'm going to go into the system, and I'm going to now query it to find out more. So I want to see what's happening. Did the traffic get blocked? Was it successful? What IP address was associated with it? So I'm going through and saying, hey, show me anywhere this destination DNS name was this name. And I got a result. So my Zscaler gave me information. And if we take a look, we'll go through these different things. It was allowed, okay? It was in Contoso. It was a 200, okay? I have the domain, and I get the full URL now. So now I have that full URL of what they clicked on. So that's good for my investigation too, okay? So I can see it looks like PayPal check-in. It looks like a typo squatted of that, okay? And I get the username, okay? So now I know that the person clicked on this. I know it's a phishing kit that was being used. So now I want to look at the machine and see, did anything weird happen on that computer? So I go through and I look at the security events, and I'm going to tell it, hey, show me anywhere this account from Contoso domain and K. Dickens was seen. So then I can get an understanding of any events that happened on the machine, okay? So I'm typing this in right now. And now I'm executing the query. And now that I've executed the query, I get some results back. So let's take a look. So let's look at the first one. So I can see, hey, it was K. Dickens account. Okay. Carlos PC, security Windows audit. And I can see, there was a new process. An Nmap was run on here. Nmap from the finance computer? Whew, no way. So now I know, somebody's mapping my network. Okay, not good. Okay. So now I'm going, oh no. I go, so this is more than just an email. Something happened on that machine. You know, what happened? Where did this come from? So from here, I can see the local IP address, and it's a type 3. So I know that's the local login. Okay. And I can see that she logged in. Okay. And so that's normal. That's what I expect. That's where she logs in from. That's where the IP address for the finance machine. So let's look at here now. So I see it's the same username, Carla PC. IP address is different. It's an external IP address. So can I take that IP address and learn more information about it? Okay, so now I take that IP address. This is the power of RiskIQ. So I go to RiskIQ, Illuminate. I'm typing in the IP address. And now let's see what happens. So now I'm in here, and I'm looking, Cobalt Strike. Remember I told you about Cobalt Strike? So now I can find out more information about Cobalt Strike, and it's malicious, 100% malicious, like we knew from the summary. Okay, but this is on a different IP address. Okay. So if we take a look at this, RiskIQ knows about 8,106 Cobalt Strike additional machines. Open source intelligence publications only know about 2,453. So we know an additional, 8,000 domains and IPs associated with it. Okay. And if I wanted to, I can put that IP in and I can search, and you'll see that there's a hit. That's already been fingerprinted as part of this list. Okay. So if you take a look on the right, you can see that this is involved with Ryuk, Wizard Spider, Grim Spider, Cobalt Gang, Cobalt Spider, and the different countries. So it's pretty bad. Okay. So now I need to do some remediations. I need to take some action on this stuff. So what I need to do is I have to add a bookmark to create an incident, so I can mark this as something that we're going to take action on, because now I have an IP address from a remote desktop connection into the finance machine. So I need to add this because I only knew about the domain where she clicked from and that domain name. So I now need to add this other entity as an incident to take action on it. Okay. So I'm going through now and I am telling it to grab the IP address from this particular event, and I'm marking it as initial access on a valid account, a domain account. Okay. And then I'll put some notes in here, and then we'll create it. And then once we create it, I'll have to go into the incidents and then take action on those incidents to remediate these things and protect the organization, and then close out the incidents. So now I'm going through and I identified the IP address as a known Cobalt Strike command and control computer. So this is serious now. So now the person clicked on it, entered the credentials were used on the local machine, Nmap was run. So, So I'll probably need to do some further investigation and maybe do some threat investigation on my own in order to get more information and see if we have anything else to worry about. Okay. So now I've done this. So now I'm going to go into the incidents. So now that I'm in the incidents, I'm going to now take some action inside of here. Okay. So I'm going to take some actions. I'm going to run some playbooks. So the first thing I'm going to do, and remember this one had the external domain, external IP address for that domain, and it had the username in there. So I'm going there, I'm going to isolate the endpoint, okay? Okay, so I'm isolating the endpoint. Okay, now I'm going to do some blocking. So I want to block the domain on all the endpoints from my organization. So this is, I'm pushing out that protection to everything in my organization, just like I showed you in that circle slide. So now I'm pushing out that protection. And then I'm going to block it on my firewall, my 48 firewall. I'm going to go block it. So no one else will go there. Nothing will come in or out on that IP. Okay. And then I'm going to block that AD user, because I don't want that user being used anywhere in my environment, invoking the tokens and blocking that account. Okay. So now I've protected that piece, but there's still that other IP address where it came in from, and I don't want anything to happen there. So now I'm going to hunting. So from the hunting, I'm going to go to my bookmarks. Okay. And I have to take the bookmark and now make and elevate it to an incident. So here it is. Okay. And now I will, I see it there. I'm going to select it. And then I'm going to create a new incident. Okay, so I'll give it some description. This is the external IP address that is involved in Cobalt Strike. That we saw the remote desktop connection from. Sorry, I'm a slow typer sometimes. Okay, and I'm going to make this a high criticality because this was bad. They ran Nmap on the on a finance machine. Okay, I'm assigning it to myself. Going to make it active, and I'm creating it. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my instance. Just going to refresh it to bring it up, and there it is. So now I'm going to select it. Okay. Now I'm going to view the details so I can make sure that it has that IP address, and it does. So now I'm going to take action on that IP. I'm going to block that on my firewall. So now I'm going to block. I'm going to block that IP address. Okay, I'm going to add the comments in here, and I'm going to close out this particular incident because I've finished on this incident. So I blocked the IP address on the firewall, and now I'm going to close out the incident. It's a true positive. I'm going to apply this. And then I have to go and close out the other one where I've already taken the action and update the ticket. So now I'm going to go to the first incident that we looked at, and I'm going to say what I did, and then I'm going to close out this ticket. So I isolated the computer, I disabled the AD account, I blocked the malicious domain, and blocked the IP address. Okay, and now I'm going to close out the ticket. And it was a true positive. Good catch by the business email compromise thing that we did. So this is a phishing attack. And it was compromised because we saw the credentials were used after she went to that website for Kay Dickens credentials. And then the credentials were used to by a Cobalt Strike server, and then Nmap was run. And it was on Carla PC. So then we need to do any more forensics. They know which one it is. Okay. So now it's done. Okay. So I've gone through this part of the investigation. Okay. So the next thing. So how are we on time?
Yeah, we're doing okay. You can keep going. Once you finish this demo, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then you can go into the next one.
So the next piece I'm going to go into is going to be 20 minutes. So do we want to take a 10-minute break now and then come back?
Yeah, let's absolutely do that. Let's have a 10-minute break. Give you some time to get a drink of water, and then we'll come back and look at the next one. Fantastic content so far. Thank you very much. I have enjoyed learning from you again, especially things like, the idea that single events are just noise. We only have so much time in our hands, especially with the not reducing number, but the shortness of how much time and attention people have to do anything. There's that chain of events, mapping the networks. I love it. It's fantastic. I think the audience will love it too.
Yeah. So when we yes. So the cool thing about this is, once you have this visibility, you'll never want to be without it, and that's the cool thing that you will see.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, we'll be back in 10 minutes.
Okay.
right, welcome back. Hope you had a good break, and we're back with Benjamin to go on to the next one. So take it away.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
It will go live any minute now. There it is. You're good to go.
Okay, so just to recap what we saw. So we had an email come in to K. Dickens, it was K. Dickens PC. Carla clicked on that malicious URL from the fish kit site, entered her credentials, and then a bad person using a Cobalt command and control server remote desktop to her machine and ran Nmap. Okay, so really good use case, but we need to go further in this investigation, and we're going to build our own threat intelligence. Okay, so show of hands, you can just hit the little hand button for a second. We usually, if we did this live, I would just say put up your hand. Have you ever used a Jupyter notebook or a notebook inside of Sentinel? So the notebooks I'm showing you today can be run directly inside of Sentinel notebooks. And we can either use Mystic or we can use the Risk IQ analyzer to be able to do these investigations and grab further data to really expand your capabilities. So what I want to do is I want to equip you on how to get these things installed, like on your machine. So what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to show you how easy it is to get going with this. And then the one thing I'm going to tell you is that all of the notebooks I'm showing today will be available and be given to you. So then you can take what we've created as a template and moving forward to use these in your practices and with customers to really go further. So what I'm doing here in this example is I'm going to go through and show you how to set up this. So I'm going to a terminal on my Mac, and I went into a directory, and I'm creating this Python virtual environment. Okay, and so what this is going to do is it's going to load up. It's going to put Python in here, make this a virtual environment. Okay, it just takes a couple seconds. And then I have to activate this virtual environment. So then I type this command to activate. And the reason why I created this video is because you might give this to a customer, you might use it with one of your techs or somebody. I wanted you to have this available to say, just do this and you can get set up, and then here's a notebook, start using it, okay? So then once we do that, what we found is that you really want to upgrade pip before you do anything. It fixes a lot of issues. So I'm going to upgrade pip, and you'll notice that my pip was outdated. So even though I've done this before, it's now corrected it and it's updated it. So I've updated my pip. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to install Mystic, and I'm going to tell it to also load up the modules for Risk IQ, Virus Total, and Sentinel. Okay. And you might need to escape out the brackets. I did. So I went through and I typed the command, and then I realized, oh, on my Mac, I need to escape it out. I left it in because you might come across this error as well, or might not. So I put that in there so you can see exactly what happens. And this is recording from my machine, so you see how long it takes. It doesn't take long at all. Okay, so now that I do this, you're going to see it go through the process of going through and downloading the modules and installing them in a directory, so it's all self-contained. And what this allows you is that if you create a notebook or create something, you can give that notebook to somebody, and it will have all the things that it needs inside there, because it's all in this little virtual environment in a directory in here. So now it's downloading all the pieces, okay? It's almost done. Doesn't take long at all. And the reason why I'm showing this is because I'm going to be running a notebook as part of my investigation and my demo. And I wanted you to know how to get that set up before we get into it. Okay. So now it's going through, it's doing the last thing, the Maximind database, so that can tell me where things are, and we can create a pew map of those things. Okay. It's almost done. There it goes. Okay, so now to start this, I just type Jupyter Notebook. And that will bring up Jupyter Notebook on my machine where I can run the Mystic or the Risk IQ Analyzer components to go through and do these investigations, okay? So this will pop open your default browser, and now I have this environment. Now, in order to use the Mystic one, you need to have a YAML file. You need to have a Mystic config YAML, and I'm going to give you an empty one that you can fill out. So if we take a look at this, the top part is all of my Sentinel information. The virus total one is so I can go find out virus total information. The Risk IQ is to go out and be able to use Risk IQ to go pull in data in there. And then the very bottom one is the key I need to be able to use the geolocation MaxMine one. So this is to use Mystic, okay? So if you fill all this out and have it in the directory where you have your notebooks, then it will pull from there and use those credentials, okay? But you might be running the Risk IQ Analyzer on its own. And when you do that, you can store the credentials differently. So I want to show you how you can do that. So we've built it where you can run a command, and then once you run that command, the credentials are stored in your home directory, so you don't have to worry about it. So I go into the directory where I installed, and I activate the virtual environment, okay? And now I run a command to do the PT config, so the passive total config, and I'll do the -H to see help to see how it's done. And we're going to run now the setup, and the setup is going to ask for the API credentials that are inside of Risk IQ Eliminator passive total. And so with that, it's your email address. That's what you use to log into passive total. And so I kick this off, and it says, okay, what's the secret? Now I go inside of Illuminate, and under the account settings, you'll see the API section. So here I am going into the account settings, and I go and I'm grabbing the organizational API, and I'm going to grab that key. I'm going to copy it, and then I go back into the terminal I pasted in, and then it shows me, okay, here it is. So now I have that in there. So now I have the credentials stored, so now I can start using the notebooks. Okay. And then next time I go in, if I haven't had anything running, I open up a terminal window, I change into the directory where I installed Python, I activate the virtual environment, and then I type Jupyter Notebook, and then that will pop open the browser to bring up my notebooks. Okay, so this is how you start it the next time. Okay. So now that we have this done, we can get into the next scenario, okay? So the next scenario is, how do I create my own threat intelligence to extend my detections and the response capabilities of my systems? So we're going to be taking threat intelligence back into Sentinel to do more things with it. So here's the scenario. So we're going to use Risk IQ Illuminate, and we're going to examine the article that was published in the previous example. And from there, we're going to build some intelligence, and then we're going to take action with it. We're going to see, once we're done with that intelligence, do we have anybody that communicated to anything bad? And if we did, then I need to bring that data back into Sentinel and take action, okay? So, one of the things I want to show you before we get into it, because we go through it rather quickly, is that in the article, it references another article where Microsoft had observed, because they actually get the emails and they open them up and they see what's good and what's bad. They actually found out that this module in a fish kit was being used by many different fish kits. So it was like a component of different fish kits. So they called it, the Frankenfish. It was like Frankenstein was made up of many bodies. This fish kit is made up of many components. And this particular one on dancevita.com was being loaded on many different fish kits. And so we're going to examine that aspect, but from the outside perspective. We know how every website interacts with every other website. Microsoft doesn't. They only know from the samples they received and what was in the samples, and that these samples matched. There was similarities between them. But we have a different perspective, and we're going to go into that. So we're going to go through now and run this scenario, okay? So let me start this one up. We'll walk through this one. Okay. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep. Yeah, that looks good.
Okay. So I'm going back into the previous example, and there was an article that was listed, okay? So I'm going to go into this article, and when I click on that, it actually opens up a browser, and it takes me to the article. So I'm in this article, okay? And Frankenfish, it was some takeaways. There was another one in there, Frankenfish, okay? And this is where it was talking about, so I'm opening that up in another tab. So now that I have this article open, as I read this article, I saw this, and this is what I did in real life. I did this at a workshop where I went through and I said, oh, look, there was this example about this dancevita.com was a component that was loaded up in both places. And I thought that was really interesting. And I go, okay, is there anything that I could do with that information? Can I find more bad by looking at that, or finding other infrastructure that was chained together? So I went in and I took that information. So I typed in dancevita.com. Okay, when I did that, something strange happened that caught my eye. It says reputation score of 68, suspicious. I go, that doesn't make sense. Why is it only suspicious? Why not malicious? We know that is a bad component. So I looked at the article. And when I looked at the article, this was just something that we published, and we didn't add any other intelligence to it, okay? So if we look at these indicators, there's 88 indicators, okay? And there were 80 domains. But if we take a look in here, you won't see a dancevita listed, because Microsoft, that was part of the component that was there, okay? They didn't see like the relationship with dancevita and the rest of the world, okay? So dancevita is missing from the list, okay? So I went, okay, it's not here. It's not here. That's kind of strange. Let me go now and investigate dancevita and see what I can find out, okay? So now that I have this, if I click on that little arrow, it will take us to our advanced search where I can see all the different data, everything we had about the history. So I get a rule, the rule that fired. So when we say something is malicious, suspicious, neutral, we give the reasons behind it. It's like the credit score, but we say why. So these are the reasoning behind what we see, okay? Upper left-hand corner, you'll see like when this was first seen was back in 2010. You see who the registrar is and the last time that we saw this, okay? Every square that's on the screen is 6 months worth of data, and each number represents the unique IP addresses we saw on that day. The bar just below that one is the entire history of this domain, and the gray areas are times where there was no data seen when we were going out there and talking to the internet. So it's been back since 2011, and last seen April 6th because I recorded this. There's been 4 IP addresses associated with it. Now the who is data, we can go back and look over time. It's anonymized, and I can go back to the previous history and look at different time periods to see if there's anything. So I can see there's a Yahoo email address in here, and this is back in Sweden. So it started off in Sweden, okay, this domain, okay? Now the certificates, I can look, there's been 35 certificates, and if I look at these, there's let's encrypt. That alone isn't bad, but it could be suspicious. It's a free certificate authority. So as you start looking at these different pieces, the more you start using it, the more you're going to train your eye to recognize these things alone aren't bad, but when you have so many of these things in one place, then it's probably bad, okay? So points of proof. So if you get more than 3 points of proof, pretty much it's bad. Now, when we look at the host pairs, this is where the beauty comes in of Risk IQ, because we're interacting with the internet like a person and we're downloading and examining the document object model, we know what comes in and out of everything. And if you take a look at this list, you're going to notice that the parent is reaching in to grab that component to present it to the client that's browsing to that parent hostname. And they're all Dance Vita, and they're all these link hrefs. So every single one of these domains is bad. Okay, I did an investigation, they're all bad. So we knew of 80 domains that when this article was published, but there's an additional 335 domains that are bad. Okay, and it's growing all the time. If we went there today in Illuminate, you'll notice that's probably 3 to 5 more. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm looking at the causes. Okay, I'm trying to see what's in here so I can see all the different causes, and some have been blocked and already been said, hey, this is on a block list, it's phishing. Others have not. So that could be that a sample hasn't come into somebody to look at. It could be that Risk IQ hasn't investigated it yet, or it's during the setup and the weaponization phase yet, and it hasn't been sent out yet. People haven't received anything yet. Okay, so now I'm going to take one that doesn't have any information with it. So I'm going to copy this, and I want to understand what it looks like. So I'm going to open this up in another tab. Okay, so I right-click and open another tab. I can click on it, but I like to do that because it preserves my investigation. Okay, so is this domain malicious? I don't know. Okay, so now let's take a look. So I'm using a tool, URL Scan.io, just to show the image, just to see, hey, can I look at this? So this is a way for me not to go there directly. And I see that there's something in here. Ooh, and the domain has been marked as malicious. And look at this. If I look at it closely, it shows invoice. And it says, because you're accessing sensitive information, you need to verify your account. Okay? Credential harvesting. And this is bad because this is kind of like what the finance thing was. They're trying to steal credentials so they can go do bad things. So this now tells me that even though it hasn't been marked inside of Risk IQ, I know this is bad. This is a bad domain. So now let's look at the host pairs in relation to this domain that we just looked at and we now know is malicious. So if we notice, that first line says aadcdn.msauth.net. That's really Microsoft's thing. So when it's loading this website, it's pulling some good things and it's pulling some bad things. And inside of here, you can see Dance Vita is listed, okay? And you can see some good things that are listed. So to explain this a little bit better, this bad website has a link href cause that's loading something from Dance Vita. So when the user visits this David marketing directo, okay, when they go there, it's pulling components from that site and other set websites to build that page for that user. And one of the things it's pulling is this bad component from dancevita.com. Okay. Now there's another example I'm going to show in a second. So now that I know this, okay, so I'm going, hey, these are running scripts. There's loading from directly from another place. Okay, all this stuff is in here. I'm going, okay. So I see sustainable infrastructure. Do you see that? That's a real website. It's a legitimate, really good website. When I did the analysis, what we found out is there's a spinner that shows like waiting, and they're loading that spinner from the sustainable infrastructure to make it look like, oh, you better hurry and put your credentials in. So that spinner is actually coming from that other website, okay? And so there's Dance Vita, okay? So now that we understand this, I have another diagram to show you, okay? So this davidmarketingdirecto.com-br, it's loading up some good things like from Microsoft. So the login.cdn.msauth.net and the Azure Active Directory cdn.msauth.net, Google Tag Manager, sustainable infrastructure, the little spinner, font, and then the bad thing, okay? So that's what's happening, okay, by looking at those host pairs. And this is the type of power that you have to understand that this is happening. And so now you're going, wow, okay, how can I take this list and know if anybody internally has done something with it, okay, or interacted with it, okay? So I can go in here, and for these things, I can block this. I can say, set an alert inside of Sentinel, and I can click directly inside of the UI and set up an alert to say, let me know if anybody goes to these sites. Or I can block this on my endpoint, but it's a one-to-one type of thing. I have to like go to every one. So if I have to go to an additional 335, it could take a lot of time. Okay, so there's 415 listed here, and they knew of 80. Okay, so if I want to go in and do this on scale, I can do it through a notebook. Okay, a Sentinel notebook, a Jupyter notebook, they work the same way. One is inside of Sentinel using compute in Sentinel, and the other one is running outside. Okay, so this one I'm running outside. I'm running on my local machine. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating this pivot environment, okay, and I'm creating the time period, okay, and I'm telling it to go back weeks, and how far I'm going back as far as I can go. So the first time I run this query, after I use that time thing, it gives me an error, okay? It's always happens, and the second time you run it, it runs fine, okay? So I'm going to go pull in all the ones that have a link H reference that are parents. I want to get that list, and now I get all those links in here. I get them all. So now I have this complete list of what was on the UI, okay, inside of a notebook. So what can I do with it, okay? So now I want to connect to my Sentinel incident. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Sentinel, has there been any DNS traffic to any of these domains? Okay, so I'm connecting to Sentinel, okay, and what I'm doing is I'm going off the page and click to authenticate, and then coming back. So this is now, every time my cursor leaves, I'm actually clicking on a thing, yes, authenticate, and then it puts my credentials in. Okay, so now I can run it on a single domain, but what I'm going to do is run it on that complete list. So now that I'm connected to Sentinel, I'm going to search that entire list of 415 things and say, show me any traffic from DNS that are going there. Okay, so now I get a hit. So now I go, uh-oh, I got a hit. So that means I had somebody internally that communicated to one of those bad domains, that David marketing website, okay, Directo. So now what I want to do is I want to connect to Sentinel, okay? So I'm going to create a watch list. I'm going to create a list inside of Sentinel so I can take action on the information that I just created, the threat intelligence I just created. So I'm connecting, and then I am going to push this watch list, and the watch list was created. So now I'm inside of Sentinel. So from here, I go to watch list. And now what I want to do is I want to find that data inside of Sentinel. So I'm going to run a query, okay, to look for that traffic where I can merge my list, my watch list, with the DNS records, and I get a hit, okay? So now I'm looking and I'm going, uh-oh, there's the website. Okay, so I'm going to copy that website. So I know that there was a hit on this, okay? But now I want to understand who did it. Okay, I know an IP address, but I want to find out the user behind it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my common security log so I can find the Zscaler incidents, so I can find who communicated to this machine, okay, and what happened. So now I run this. Oh, I have to change the time period, okay? And I run this, and now I get some data back. Okay, so now that I see this, I start getting more. So I have the destination, I got the source IP, I got the place in which, oh, Benjamin went there. And I get the full URL, okay, of what he saw, okay? Now, that's what we just saw here. That's the full URL there, okay? So, Benjamin entered his credentials in there with that little spinny wheel saying, hey, if you want to see the invoice, you need to like put your credentials in, okay? So now I need to create a bookmark, okay? So from this watch list, I create a bookmark, and the bookmark is going to contain all of those things that are important to me. So then I can create an incident. And then from that incident, I can do remediations on it. So I'm grabbing that IP address. Okay. So the destination IP. Okay. Grabbing the host name, which is the destination DNS name. And then I'm going to just paste that in there as a note. Okay, so I've created that. But now I want to look at Benjamin's machine. I want to look at Benjamin's account. I want to know what happened in there. So that's the next part of the investigation. So from that threat intelligence, now I'm taking action internally to expand my investigation. So I know that there was one domain that was bad out of those 415. And now I'm going to see what happened with Benjamin. Did any weird activity happen like Carla did where Nmap was run? Okay. So I'm searching for Benjamin and from Contosa Hotels so I can see, hey, if anything happened. So now I'm going to open this up and I see Benjamin PC. I see the local IP address. So this is when Benjamin logged in. Okay. So now I look in here and I see Benjamin logging in, but an external IP address. So let's see where this IP address is. Do we have any intelligence on this? So this is dynamic intelligence. We're going to go out right now and see what we find. So by putting this IP address in, Risk IQ is going to give me a reputation on that IP and let me know more about it. And sure enough, there's a bad reputation. Oh, Cobalt Strike again. We did this before, but it's a different IP. Okay, so if I would have blocked everything on that list, I would have been inoculated. Okay, so we had the 11,000 indicators. We have all that information. So if I come in here, I can see and I can look at there's published 2453, but we know 8,106, and it's listed here. So, I got a known bad IP logging in with a stolen credential. Okay, so what happened? Are there any processes I can look at to see, did this person do anything? Okay, so let's now take a look. So Benjamin's machine. So I'm looking at this information going, oh no, what am I going to do? I'm going to need to let everybody know. So let's figure out what else is happening. So I'm going to create an incident out of this because I need to mark the machine. I need to say, hey, this IP address is bad. Okay. So this was the RDP from this known Cobalt Strike server. So I'm creating that bookmark now that I can now go from the watch list to a bookmark to an incident to remediation. Okay. So that's happening right now. I'm putting all the pieces so then everything's documented. It's all good. So then the playbooks can take these entities and do actions with them. Okay, this is initial access. It was involved with phishing and it was using a domain account. So I'm marking all that. I'm going to put my notes in. Just going to copy and paste real quick. Clock's ticking. I want to make sure I can take action on this. So now I know that this bad thing happened. So now let me look at if there was any processes. I want to know what happened. Okay. So I'm now going to that last log. Okay. And when I look at this last log, I see, okay, Benjamin's machine, Benjamin's PC, a process was created, and which was, Mimikatz. It dumped the credentials from the machine. So now I'm like, oh no. So this person got in and dumped the credentials from this machine. I now need to take action to see what's happening and what credentials were being used there. So I'm like, oh no. Okay, so now I need to go and open the incidents and do the remediations. So now from here, I go into the bookmarks. And from the bookmarks, I need to elevate those to instance. Okay. So I'm going to take the first one, which is the one with the domain. So no one else goes there. Okay. And I want to create the incident. I'm going to give it a little description. So credential harvesting phishing kit site. It's high criticality. I'm assigning it to myself. I'm going to make it active. I'm going to create it. Okay, and now I'm going to take that IP address for the remote access, and I want to be able to create an instance so I can block it. Okay. So now I'm documenting it. And Mimikatz ran on the machine, so pretty serious thing. I'm going to assign it to myself and make it active. And then I'm going to go into the instance, do the remediation, and close out the tickets. So I create the incident. So now I have the domain and its IP address from the initial email that the user clicked on. And now I'm going to run the playbooks on this. So I'm going to block these real quick. I'm going to block the domain on all endpoints. I'm closing out the incident with its true positive. Okay, so I've protected the organization now from that threat. And now I'm going to go into the last one. So I'm refreshing this. I see the Cobalt Strike one. Isolating the PC now. Now I need to block that IP. And the last thing is I need to block the user. I need to block that account. Okay, I'll put the comments and I'll close out the ticket. We've isolated the PC, we blocked the IP for RDP, and we disabled the account. So we started with an article, created our own threat intelligence that no one knew about, We took that intelligence and we ran a notebook to see if we got any hits in our internal Sentinel. Once we found that connection, there was something, then we took that information into Sentinel through a watch list and then ran that same query to find those events. And from there, built this whole chain of information to figure out the full extent of this attack internally, so then we can block it. And so with that, we fully extended our detections and response to be able to take care of this threat. So from here, we're done in just 2 slides. We have this credentials harvesting site, dancevita.com, where all these sites were loading things bad. And then we had one particular site that we found from that entire list, okay? So when we look at this, we had the email that was sent to Benjamin. It went on his machine. He clicked on it. He entered his credential. And from that, another person logged in. And we saw an example. We saw like how that looked like. It was an invoice. So it was like targeted to these type of things for business email compromise. So this gives you the capability of now creating your own threat intelligence and using a notebook, for example, to be able to preserve that investigation. So I can go back at any time and run it again and get a new list and check it to see if I have another hit. So the data stored inside of the notebook. So that's preserved the whole thing. So at any point in time, I can go back to it and I can rerun those queries and see if anything else has changed. And I can just change the time period to say, instead of go back to the beginning of time, go back a week, because I'm running a week later, and just see if anything's there. So it's very, very cool to be able to have that capability. And customers are loving this type of experience. And I can take those notebooks and somebody can just change the domain, change the IP, and rerun them again and do a full new investigation. So that is why I am providing these notebooks as a template to you, so you can start these. If you haven't, you know how to install them now and you know how to run them, so you can go through and you can really kickstart your practices to be able to use these things. And this is where I would break for Steve.
Yeah, please do. So that's fantastic yet again. Thank you so much. There was a question that came in from the audience, which
Sure.
Marie was asking about. Can this feature only be used for threat hunting, or is it only once an alert is issued? Expand upon that one.
It can be used for hunting, for vulnerability. So I'm going to go through examples where I'm going to look for, it doesn't have to be with an alert. So I just had event data. So I took my threat intelligence and looked at raw event data to create those alerts. So there was no alert at all in my system. Nobody knew about that threat. It wasn't published anywhere. So I created my own threat intelligence to be able to go in and leverage that information internally inside of Sentinel to make those detections.
Excellent. And then obviously you're doing a very manual approach here where you're showing an experienced analyst being able to walk through this. You can't do that with every single alert that ever happens. And so a lot of it will be automatable, built into products as we do more and more integration with RiskIQ. So looking forward to the next one from you. You'll come back and show us one more before the end of the day. Yes. And so thank you so much. Next, Steve Ginty. Looking forward to seeing your case study, vulnerabilities, and take it away. Thank you.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. That's good. You're live at the minute, and then we'll flick to the slides as soon as we can. There you go. You're live.
All right. I'm gonna mute if you.
We just lost your audio.
All right, let's try now.
That's better. Okay, try again.
All right, thanks for the introduction. Happy to be here to walk through and build off of some of the capabilities that Benjamin's shown and how RiskIQ's intelligence teams help organizations understand the global vulnerability landscape and use threat intelligence to inform their response. So, can you see that next slide? Yeah, there we go. I'm Steve Ginty, and we're going to walk through an introduction, a overview of the 2021 vulnerability landscape, an analysis of the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities list from 2021, and then kind of walk through how RiskIQ goes about actioning intelligence and how our customers and partners can use RiskIQ data to turn vulnerability intelligence into actionable decision-making inside of their environments. So as I said, I'm Steve. I'm the Director of Intelligence here at RiskIQ. My background is in conducting a threat analysis on cybercrime and nation-state activities. I'm the co-founder of our Passive Total platform, which Benjamin was giving a deep dive to a minute ago. And I'm excited to walk through how our teams can empower organizations with our data. So I like to position the conversation around what last year's vulnerability landscape looked like to set the stage of kind of scale of the problem that organizations are tackling and how we can kind of move from that large scale number of vulnerabilities into operationalizing information inside of RiskIQ's platform to empower organizations. If we look at the vulnerabilities by the numbers in 2021, there were over 20,000 vulnerabilities disclosed via NIST's National Vulnerability Database. That represented roughly a 9.3% increase year over year. And it broke down into over 4,000 critical and high severity vulnerabilities, the largest tranche in medium severity vulnerabilities, and then a little over 3,100 low severity vulnerabilities. Interesting to note in that breakdown is the critical and high severity vulnerabilities were roughly flat to a little bit of a decline year over year. But we saw a very large increase in the number of zero-day vulnerabilities that were discovered in the wild. So there were 58 vulnerabilities identified last year in the wild, meaning that attacks were taking place and malicious actors were leveraging these vulnerabilities to target organizations, and there was no patch available. And that was the first known use of that vulnerability to target an organization. This represented almost a 2.3% increase since over 2020, and so there was a lot more activity that organizations found themselves, responding to without patches available. And intelligence could help us kind of understand how we can use information about the actors and the vulnerability to put defenses in place while we're waiting for patches to come online. So with that broad kind of capture of vulnerabilities, with over 20,000 vulnerabilities and even 4,000 vulnerabilities of critical or high severity, how should organizations really approach filtering that amount of information down to find the signal from the noise? How do you actually action what's important to an organization and target your limited resources effectively? As RiskIQ has looked at this, we know that the threat and vulnerability landscape is dynamic. Organizations are responding to an ever increasing volume of high severity and critical severity vulnerabilities. We saw that significant uptick from 2020 to 2021 in zero-day vulnerabilities in the wild. Attack surfaces are increasing consistently over the last few years as we've moved to kind of this hybrid cloud environments. We're defending not only a new cloud space, we're also trying to understand and keep situational awareness on legacy IT infrastructure. So all of these things kind of create what seems like an impending drumbeat of issues that organizations have to triage and respond to on a monthly basis. From RiskIQ's standpoint, how do we effectively help organizations respond to this growing and dynamic vulnerability landscape? It's really around visibility. Knowing where things are in your environment, having the tools at hand to pinpoint where you should focus your limited resources, and on top of that, knowing the type of actors that are targeting your organization and that are leveraging the vulnerabilities at hand can help you prioritize how quickly you patch something or put mitigating remediation steps in effect to effectively manage your risk. And so, intelligence can provide us the ability to triage and prioritize new vulnerabilities and even legacy vulnerabilities as actors may be start to make use of older vulnerabilities against our organizations. And so one of the things that my team decided to look at is how do we take that noise and filter it down? From Risk IQ's perspective, the things that are serious for organizations tend to come down to remote code execution vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities that a malicious and well-intended actor can use as a foothold into your organization. And so, using a baseline to understand last year's, remote code execution vulnerabilities based off of we're using CISA's known exploited vulnerability list. And so we went through that list from last year and surfaced 33 remote code execution vulnerabilities. That was about a 10% increase from 2020. And we started to dig through open source intelligence to understand what types of actors were leveraging these remote code execution vulnerabilities. And surprising or not, 61% of those vulnerabilities were connected to nation state exploitation. 79% of those vulnerabilities were connected to cybercrime activity. And 43% of the vulnerabilities overlapped, meaning both nation state funded actors and cyber criminals were leveraging similar vulnerabilities to target organizations. And so I think the interesting piece here is of those 33 vulnerabilities, over almost 80% of them were being used by cybercrime actors. And so these types of significant critical vulnerabilities that come into the market over a year's span are things that a lot of organizations really need to take seriously. They're not just vulnerabilities that are being used by advanced actors that are targeting a specific set of government and critical infrastructure. We're seeing that cybercrime actors leverage these vulnerabilities as well in order to gain access to organizations. One of the reasons maybe that this that we're seeing this trend is if we look at kind of proof of concept code, code available online that can help a malicious or a researcher understand a vulnerability and how it can be exploited. Of the 33 vulnerabilities, 20 of those had proof of concept code available online in association with them. And we were able to find 5 instances where proof of concept code was available pre-patch. And one of the instances you may recall is Log4j in last December, where there was proof of concept code surfaced almost over in 6+ months prior to the vulnerability being discussed. And as we analyze a lot of the code trends and the proof of concept code, we're able to see kind of a range of -6 days to plus 120 days for that proof of concept code being available. So on average, within 23 days of a release of a new remote code execution vulnerability, we're seeing some type of proof of concept code available that an actor could leverage to target an organization. So that's a short window for us as organizations to defend against it. And so kind of looking at all of this, I think this kind of helps position in how we respond as organizations to new vulnerabilities coming out and being released. We have to really understand who's motivated to use it, how would they impact my organization, and how quickly do I have to defend against it, and how can I use intelligence to help inform my defenses. So having looked at 2021 and kind of the overarching trends of a broad vulnerability ecosystem into kind of actionable vulnerability intelligence based off our own analysis and information available via CISA's known exploited vulnerability database, how do we go and take these steps of putting intelligence into action for an organization as a new vulnerability comes up? And so I'm going to walk through 3 areas where we can start to dig in to recent vulnerabilities and how Risk IQ's data allows organizations to gain situational awareness about the vulnerability, understand the timeline of exploitation and actors using the vulnerability, and then using that same data set to understand the individuals maybe behind the vulnerability. And so the first vulnerability I wanted to dig into was from early December. It's a vulnerability in Zoho Manage Engine Desktop Central. This is a platform for remotely managing desktops inside of a corporate environment. It's used by individual organizations. It's also used by broader managed security service providers to manage systems on behalf of organizations. And so on December 3rd, Zoho released an advisory noting that there was a critical vulnerability, and this vulnerability was an authentication bypass vulnerability that would allow an actor to gain access to the vulnerable system and to run arbitrary code if successful, thereby gaining access and a foothold into an organization. We saw 7 days later where CISA came out with an alert noting that they were adding this specific vulnerability to their known exploited vulnerability list. And then another 7 days post that, the FBI released a flash alert noting that the vulnerability had been actively exploited in the wild by nation-state associated actors since October of 2021. So even pre-announcement of the December vulnerability disclosure and patch. So what kind of intelligence is available to an organization to help kind of triage and understand the impact of this type of vulnerability? We can go into RiskIQ's data collection and understand that we've seen roughly 10,000 historical Desktop Central observations in our collection. And of those 10,000, a little over 300 were running Desktop Central version 10, the version that impacted or potentially impacted by this vulnerability since that October 2021 timeframe noted in the FBI flash alert. On the right, we can see that we've extracted that flash alert into an article inside of our intelligence portal. We've tagged it appropriately with the sourcing and reference URLs, and we've extracted the indicators inside of that flash alert, those 13 public indicators that an organization can then use maybe in hunting or in enrichment and alerting inside of their environment. Additionally, on the left-hand side of the screen, we see a vulnerability insight. In this case, we are fingerprinting where those active Desktop Central version 10 systems are inside of not only our global perspective with the 300 plus, but inside of an individual organization's perspective. So as an organization, if I want to triage this very quickly, I can come in and understand that RiskIQ knows that Desktop Central is running on this singular asset inside of my environment. And I can go and start an investigation to understand the potential impacts to my business. Not only are we able to take those IOCs and extract them and tell them where they are in your environment, where you can then triage and make the haystack smaller, you can go understand, is that system impacted by this vulnerability? If so, I want to start a response and I want to use these IOCs, the malware hashes, the host names, etc., inside of the flash alert to understand if this specific activity discussed by the FBI is impacting me, so I can start to ingest this information and these IOCs into my systems and my triage process. You'll note here that we can also go from infrastructure noted in a public disclosure by the FBI, where we have this one domain, this ns2.latincorp.com domain, and we can expand that into an understanding of some of the actor tools that may be used in the targeting that the FBI is mentioning. If we go into our system and interrogate our data, RiskIQ notes that host is associated with an IP address that also has this SSL certificate up on the top right-hand corner associated with the IP. We'll see that we've associated this certificate with that host's IP infrastructure from November 28, roughly around the time frame of active exploitation, through February 2nd of this year. It's a self-signed cert that is also associated with 895 additional IP addresses inside of our collection. And so while that may seem like a lot, if you think of RiskIQ's collection and our scanning of the global internet, things that have fewer than 1,000 observations inside of our ecosystem are usually of interest to us and our analysts. That's a fairly low frequency event, combined with the fact that it's this self kind of signed generated cert. I want to go investigate more and understand what might be associated with this infrastructure. If we look at that first IP address in that list, the 137 IP, we'll see that inside of RiskIQ's Analyst Insights, we've associated the IP address with a tool that is known as ShadowPad inside of our cyber threat intelligence collection. So now we've taken singular domain to IP and certificate to additional connection to ShadowPad toolkit. We can click into that link and see that we have a tool card for ShadowPad itself. We note that it is at times been associated with use by Chinese nation state activity. We also note that ShadowPad has at times focused on supply chain attacks and targeting organizations where they can get a broad swath of capture of organizations that they can impact, which would align with the targeting of something like Managed Central, which is used by managed service providers and organizations to manage IT infrastructure. And so now we've gone from a flash alert and a specific vulnerability inside of our organization to a tool, in this case ShadowPad, and a significant amount of IOCs, 2,000 indicators of interest inside of our portal that we can use to proactively hunt inside our environment to understand if this activity has in fact impacted our organization. So we have visibility into the vulnerability as it's being released and disclosed. We also have IOCs and infrastructure that allow us to proactively go into our systems and hunt historically to ensure if we have been compromised in that October through December time period that the FBI was noting, we can go and conduct an appropriate investigation with the appropriate IOCs and context. So I like this example because it goes, kind of full life cycle from a critical vulnerability disclosed through to infrastructure and IOCs and tooling that can inform your incident response. Switching gears, another example of kind of being able to use our data to understand global scale of vulnerable infrastructure. We also in February had a disclosure from CISA around WatchGuard devices being targeted by Cyclops Blink malware. And the Cyclops Blink malware was noted as a new malware family connected to the Sandworm actors, which is a Russian affiliated actor group that was targeting these WatchGuard firewall devices that were vulnerable to compromise, and they were rounding up these compromised devices into a proxy network for follow-on attacks against organizations. Looking at the alert, we can see that those devices that were impacted were only those devices that were reconfigured from the manufacturer's default setting to allow open remote management interfaces that are internet accessible. And so taking that bit of information, WatchGuard devices and internet accessible management consoles, RiskIQ's analysts can dig into our global data and understand, get an understanding of scope of how many potential devices could be round up into this botnet, what could they be used for, where were they located on the internet. And what we find when we start to dig in is not only do we have an understanding of the vulnerability, we have a threat briefing where our analysts walk through how we go about identifying these potentially vulnerable devices that could be round up into this Cyclops Blink malware proxy network. And when we looked at devices that had open management ports that we could effectively scan, combined with presence of known WatchGuard device fingerprinting, we found roughly 64,000 devices on the internet at the time of that disclosure that had the potential to be exploited for use in this proxy network. Obviously, not all of those were being used, but if this is something of a worry for an organization, we could tell you where potentially vulnerable devices were based on the exposure of a management console, and you could go mitigate that risk or identify them in your network. From a researcher's perspective, you could also take that information and understand where the potential IP addresses were associated to devices that could be compromised into this proxy network. But we could take that a step further, and we're able to look at IOCs provided in public reporting to identify devices that were compromised. And so an analysis of IP addresses compromised by Cyclops Blink surfaced some unique SSL certificates inside of our data collection that allowed us to identify 50 such certificates across 150 IP addresses associated with WatchGuard infrastructure that were in fact compromised and initially round up as a part of this proxy network. Now, in the ensuing months, the DOJ has gone through and has taken down this proxy network, but we're still monitoring to see, will it pop back up? Can we use these indicators as an ability to fingerprint new potentially compromised infrastructure? They weren't just going after these WatchGuard firewalls. The group was compromising additional devices as well. And so we can use these kind of breadcrumbs to find and understand where vulnerable devices are, and also where actors are compromising those vulnerable devices. So again, a good insight of going from alert of activity and potentially vulnerable devices to a broad capture of 64,000 devices on the internet that had the potential to be compromised, to a corpus of 150 IP addresses known to be compromised. These can all be used to inform our incident response and investigations. And now the final vulnerability I want to talk through is more recently, and some may have been responding to this. This is the Spring Shell vulnerability. And so in late March, early April, it was announced that there was a vulnerability in JDK9 and higher. It was a remote code execution vulnerability. And you can see by the headline here is this new vulnerability in the Java, the Spring Java framework, the new Log4Shell. A lot of us spent the later part of December responding to the Log4j vulnerabilities and Log4Shell, and there was a lot of follow-on impact that the industry is still dealing with. And so there was a lot of worry right out of the gate that this was yet another instance of a framework vulnerability we were going to be responding to for a long time. And while I think this vulnerability will still pose problems to organizations, and it has been added to CISA's known exploited vulnerability list, the intelligence gives us some information that makes it a little less severe than Log4j. Noted in the write-up was that it required kind of a discrete deployment to be run, and that the default deployment of this was not vulnerable to the exploit. And so both of those bits of information make it harder for this vulnerability to be actively exploited. RiskIQ can take that information, the information from that release, and identify Spring Boot and Spring frameworks inside of an organization's attack surface. We can combine that with observations of Apache Tomcat, which had to be present for part of the exploitation, and we can give you a corpus of devices that are potentially impacted by this vulnerability that you can prioritize for scanning and understanding of impact holistically. But we can also kind of walk through an intelligence alert inside of our platform and provide you the perspective of our vulnerability analysts and our capture of intelligence as we run honeypots to understand activity taking place. And note that we did see scanning for this exploit, and that there was low level volume of scanning for it based on what we saw for Log4j exploit scanning. And we can combine that with open source intelligence that showed that there was some exploitation of this successful in the first weeks or so of the vulnerability being announced. But a lot of that was appeared to be in honeypots, and a lot of it appeared to be that this was a lot harder to exploit than Log4j due to the lack of implementation in the default configuration. And so this is an instance where there was a very panic, I would say, even on our side of, oh my gosh, are we having another Log4j moment? And while this is a serious vulnerability that organizations have to investigate and address, it was not as severe as what we experienced with Log4j, and everybody could take a breath for a minute and understand how to effectively respond based on the intelligence available. So all three of those 2021 into 2022 vulnerabilities, combined with kind of our broad scale view of vulnerabilities in 2021, what are the key takeaways from this analysis? I really think the key takeaways is that intelligence can inform action. The visibility can inform how an organization approaches and effectively approaches response to the dynamic vulnerability landscape. And data from RiskIQ that we collect can inform your investigations to help respond to those vulnerabilities. And so, while it seems like there's an ever increasing storm of vulnerabilities that we have to respond to, organizations can use intelligence to inform their defenses and their response, and effectively use the limited resources we have to ensure we're targeting into to actioning the vulnerabilities that are going to give us the best defense against the actors that are targeting us. And so hopefully you learned something, and there's some useful information inside this presentation that can be taken and used inside of your environment. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Again, just fantastic insights. I love coming on these sessions. I know I'm hosting them, but I get to learn at the same time. So I just feel like I'm part of the audience. Benjamin's doing a great job in the Q&A, answering questions, and now he's going to come back and do another session for us, which would be great. So I think you've got one last session with you, Benjamin, before we do the round table. All right. And again, any questions you want to bring in, either for Benjamin in his very deep technical sessions, or for our other presenters, to make sure that you can ask something about some of the other sessions we've got, please put them in the Q&A window now. We'll queue them all up and we'll come back in 10, 20 minutes. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Let me bring up my slides. Okay. So the next aspect is, can everybody see my slides just before we start?
Where's my mute key? Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So the biggest thing now is, how can I become proactive in my threat investigation? Do I have to wait for that bad thing to come into my environment before I can take action? And the answer is you can. You can become more proactive. And that's what I'm going to go through now, is show you how you can find these bad things, these phishing kits that are targeting your organization without getting the email. And you're going, what? And so this is the perspective that we can give to organizations. So we know that these bad phishing kits are loading things that are bad, and that bad thing might move to another spot. But they're also loading things that are good to imitate the target. So can I look at what is being loaded that is good and find the bad? And the answer is yes, and we're going to go through and demonstrate that. Okay, so we looked at this David Marketing Directo website, and we saw how things were listed in the host pairs. Okay, so remember this, where we show that, hey, the login CDN, the AAD CDN from msauth.net were taking images into this bad website, along with Google Tag Manager, sustainable infrastructure, a font, and the bad component from dancevita.com. Now, if I want, I can flip the lens and start with the good thing, because I have the host pairs. I know everyone that's pulling in my images from around the world. I can now flip the lens and see, how is my known good resources being utilized by others around the world, and look at that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the aadcdn.msauth.net, and then go into a notebook, and I'm going to show two different notebooks, the exact same investigation in Mystic and in the RiskIQ Analyzer. So you can see examples of how it's done, because some people might be Mystic people, other people might be RiskIQ API Analyzer users, and I wanted to give the same example so you can see how it's done and you have them. Now, the Mystic one will give you the capability of putting it back inside of Sentinel. So if you want to be able to take the information and put it back in the Sentinel, you might want to use the Mystic one. If you're just doing the investigation just to get the down and dirty on what's happening, you can use the RiskIQ Analyzer. Okay. And then we're going to go through, and as we go through and we do these types of investigations in the UI and inside of the notebooks, the Sentinel notebooks that can be run inside or outside of Sentinel, we'll start to see these bad things that are popping up and look at them. Okay. And I just picked two examples to look at. Okay. And how those are being loaded. But if you notice, in this list, Danzavita is not listed there. So this is a different fish kit, but they're using the known good images to trick the person to think that they're on the real site. Okay, so we started off with Dance Vita, and inside of Dance Vita, we had all these bad domains that were loading a component from all these domains that were loading a component from Dance Vita from looking at the host pairs. Then we found one, and we noticed that it's loading up a Microsoft known good thing, an image from this aacdn.net. So when I right click and open this up another tab, I now can see everything that Microsoft is loading. I'm looking at their infrastructure. If you notice here, it's Microsoft. It's been around since 2018. The number of IP addresses range from like 140 to 2 that we've seen, and we have all this information. But if we go to the host pairs, so now I'm bringing up over 318,000 host pairs. Like if I went to PayPal objects, I might bring up 2 million host pairs, okay? But when I bring this up now, I'm going to show you how I can do this on the screen. But it's not really scalable in this particular instance because there's so many that are in here. So if I go in and expand out the causes, okay, we were looking at images, but I've also found doing these types of workshops and investigations that when people copy your website, they might do a CSS import to bring in the style sheets. So I'm going to bring up images, okay? So I went from 318,000, and now I am at 6,676, and I'm also going to do that CSS import. Okay, so when I use the checkbox, that's to only show me those results. And if I clicked on the X, that would have removed those results from the screen. So I'm telling it, only show me those 2 things, okay? Now, I can also change how many lines are being displayed. I'm going to make it 500. So I can scroll through and we can see how many of these have already been captured. Because, if the sample gets into Microsoft, they're quickly able to look at it and say, oh, nope, it's phishing. From any of its customers that are using it from the M365 hosted exchange, they have all that. And you can notice here how all of these things have already been blocked, but others haven't. But like as we go through, you're going to start seeing some strange names come up. So like all these glitch me, like assorted sponge dungeon. And it's been blocked, but like it's like some sort of dictionary that's being used on some of these free or cheap hosting sites to be able to create these environments and use them and destroy them really quickly. Or because maybe it's only for a limited time, they're just popping these up, doing their attacks, and just using this infrastructure on many different domain names on these places. So like here was a CSS import from a login msalstorage.accessserver.com. We have all these office worker ones, all these bad things, okay? And if you notice, as we go through, this is looking at a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of information in here that maybe I want to go through and get reputation scores on some of the ones that aren't listed. So this is where a notebook could be used to speed up your investigation and allow maybe even a junior person to go through. Because if I miss one, that could be bad. And I want to try to be as thorough as possible and as fast as possible to take the knowledge of what a seasoned threat investigator might do and document it, and now allow somebody else to follow through and use that as a template, but also to jumpstart an organization to be able to do this, or a partner to be able to go out and say, I've developed it for one client, I can now use it for many clients. So you can reuse that piece that you've done. So what I've done is I have a Jupyter notebook, and inside this, we're using Mystic. So we're using the API calls for Mystic. And so I'll walk through this, and I have one that I've already ran, and I have one where we can run some things. So what I wanted to do in this one was go through, grab all of the host pairs. Okay, so if we go through, this sets up the environment. Okay, so this is setting up the Mystic environment. This one's going through and saying, okay, I'm going to do some pivots on DNS and IP addressing. And then I am setting up the queries, I'll use this one, the query time to say, I want to go back 4 weeks and grab 4 weeks worth of data. And then I'm going to go through and query all of the data. And what I've created here was, we call this a pivot pipeline. So you'll notice here that I have a lot of this commented out, because if I run it, it just does it and it's all done. And I wanted to go through piece by piece and tell you what each line does and explain that to you so you can see. So this first line is going out and grabbing all the host pairs, okay? And that's what we see here. And if we take a look, we have over 2,000 rows worth of host pairs that came in, okay? And some of these causes are known, some are not known. So I want to go through and do more with that. So the next thing is, I want to filter and only have CSS import and images. And if you notice here, that's what I see listed, okay? So I have all of those pieces here. And then I want to go through, and I wanted to give an example of how to remove an entry. So then if you do want to filter out an item, you have an example of how to do that, okay? So this just drops that entry. Now this one will go through and query and do a dropping any duplicates that we see. So we have just a unique list of host pairs, okay, and parents. Now I want to rename the parent to host name, so then if I do want to push that back into Sentinel, I already have it done. So that's what this one does, okay? And if you notice, it's already been cached. We pulled it on the initial query, and now these are just subsequent filtering of that data, okay? So now I'm running a pivot to go through and join the data, the DNS reputation on those. So if we come across now, you'll start seeing that reputation data showing up in these Panda data frames, okay? And then running the next one now is going to add the summary data to say, hey, how many things came back? How many certificates? How many projects? How many articles? Those types of data coming back, okay? And then this one is to go through, and what it will do is it's going to run this to get the IP addresses associated with that domain name. And when we do this, it might have multiple IP addresses on that domain. And so what we're going to do, we're going to then have to break those out to make each one of those IP addresses a new entry, so then we can take action with it if we need to put it into Sentinel. So if we come across, we'll look at some of the IP addresses, and you'll notice that, hey, there's more than ones, like this one has a few in here. So now I want to go through and take that down and explode those to new lines. So now what I'm doing is I'm running that, and it's going through and making each one of those IP addresses on a new line in there. This will just take a minute to run, and I have now those results, okay? So now I want to duplicate, I want to take out any of the duplicates with the host names, because I might have that host name in there more than once now. So that's going to drop those, okay? So it's going to run for a second. And then I'm going to drop those duplicates. And then the next one, I already ran this. And this was to go out and grab the geolocation information associated with those IP addresses. So the geolocation is not on a domain, because that domain can be anywhere in the world. It's on the IP addresses, which is that physical place of where it resides on the internet. And so what I did was I ran that just before, where I ran all of these and grabbed that geolocation information. So if you notice here, you'll start to see country, longitude, latitude of where these are. So I wanted to be able to create like a pew pew map to say, this is where these domains are located. So for example, if you have a customer that's only based in the United States and only hosted in the United States, and these are people fishing that domain, and you can now plot them to see where they are in the world. Are they in the US or someplace else? So inside of here, I wanted to analyze the reputation score to say, hey, how many were suspicious? How many were malicious? How many were unknown that there was no threat intelligence on that I might need to dive deeper in? So going back the 4 weeks, there's 414 that were unknown. So I can go through those lists and go look at the images and or add a way of going out and pulling those images inside of the notebook. I can grab those from like URL Scan.io and be able to show an image for that domain to see if anything was seen there and if whether they saw it as malicious or not. But I wanted to do the analysis on top of the reputation. So here I had all those unknowns, but I wanted to throw those out and look at that distribution to see, you know, if you didn't look at the unknowns, everything in that list is pretty much malicious. And then I graphed it. I took that geolocation information, and Mystic gives you the capability of actually creating a nice map directly from here. So remember when I showed you how there was a Mystic config.yaml file, and there was the credentials for virus total, for risk IQ, for Sentinel, and the MaxMine API was so that when you use that function of getting the geolocation, but then graphing it, that MaxMine database comes in play where it went out to each IP and found out where they were in the world, so then we can graph it. And that's what we have here. So now I know that, you know, out of this list, there's about 119 that I would immediately say, hey, no one talk to those. They're suspicious or they're malicious. And then the 414 need to be looked at further. And that can then be taken and determined what's happening, throw it into Sentinel as a watch list. So at the very bottom, I have that piece that I showed you in the previous notebook where I can connect to Sentinel. I could do a query to see if there's anyone talking to those. And then I can create a watch list if I need to go take action or to do further detection down the road to say on a weekly, monthly process, go through and check to see if anybody talked to those, for example. Because some of these might be in the setup and weaponization and they're not active yet. So there's no intelligence, but you might need to go and do some further investigation to see if they're really good or if they're actually malicious. Now, the next notebook I want to go through is doing this exact same investigation, but we're going to do it through the Risk IQ Analyzer. So in this one, when I had all these queries in here, so this last one is all I would have needed to run to do the whole thing. And what I did was I went through and showed you each step of the way what each line did, so you understand that pivot path. So with one square, I did the full investigation, I did the pew-pew map. So now I'm going to go to the analyzer, which is a little bit different. And what I'm going to do here is I can run this one. So I'm just going to say cell run all, just so you can see how long it takes to run this. It's not that long. It doesn't take that long. And what I'm doing is I'm telling it to just go back 3 days. So we're not waiting here a long time. I can make this any number of days. But I'm just telling it, go back and look at the last 3 days of results that we saw where there were images and CSS imports, and then do the analysis on that. And you can see this data starting to pop in now. And you can notice that here's all the records that came in, tons in here. Then what happens is once I get those records, I'm doing a few things with it. The first thing is creating a data frame from here so I can look at it in a pretty format and see the columns in here. And I'm looking at all the different causes. I told it to tell me which causes were here because I want you to be able to reuse this. You might say, oh, I need this cause or that cause, and you'll have them listed. And then I wanted to be able to create a whitelist because some of the things you might see are going to go, oh, that's Microsoft, or that's my own domain, or that's a known good. I'm just going to remove those entries from the list. And you can create a whitelist. And so that's what's here. And then I wanted to be able to show you how to remove an entire TLD. So like .gov, for example, you might say, oh, if there's any .govs, just remove that from those lists. So I show you how to do a whitelist for a TLD. That's what this line is. And then I'm filtering the results that we pull back to just show me images and CSS imports. And that's what I'm seeing here. The next step is I want to make a list so I can do something with it. So now I have this nice host list. And that's what we're looking at here, all the host names that are associated with these. And then if I could maybe want to look at just the domains, not the full host name, but just the domain itself. And so this right here is going through and looking at just the domains from that list, showing you how to filter those, okay? And then I went through and said, go through and run this on those domains themselves. So like you'll notice that some of these domains that are showing up, it doesn't care what the subdomain is, what that host name is. It'd say, hey, these are malicious. So this list could be put into production and say, just don't communicate with .tw, this vipshopping.com/tw. It's malicious. Whatever's in front of it, doesn't matter. They're going to be malicious pretty much. So it gives you the way of looking at from that perspective. But also, the next thing I wanted to do was to look at how long these domains were. And the rule of thumb we always hear is if it's less than 30 days old, don't go there. But these threat actors know that. So they're using infrastructure that has been around for a long time. And those domains have been around for a long time. So then they're making a subdomain off of that domain. So when you're checking to say, how old is this domain? It's giving you a very large number. So if you look at some of these, 9,000 days, 300 days, 79 days, it's tons. There are many, many days. So that wouldn't help you, okay? So the next thing I wanted to do was to try to put this together because I know what's malicious and what's not, and I wanted to be able to put this together in a nice table format so I can see, hey, which ones are malicious, which ones are suspicious, which ones are neutral, which ones are unknown. So this could be a list that you can work off of. You can actually go through and start doing your investigations. And then I went through and said, hey, let me take some of these. So for example, let's take this one. So if I grab this and I put it into place here, and let's run this one, I can see the host pairs. You remember we looked at the host pairs on that tab? I wanted to go through very quickly and see all of the host pairs that were associated with this one domain. And I can see it's bringing in that AAD CDN because that's what we started to search with, but it's also using Amazon. There's some other things in here. So let's find another one. Let me find a malicious one. Let's look at this one. Twilight Flower 9933.on.fleek.co. Okay, so let's look at this one. So you can see inside of here, it's malicious, but it's not using Dance Vita. So I understand now that it's a different fish kit or a different fish actor that's targeting my organization. So that infrastructure that's on Dance Vita could be moved to another place, and we don't know about it, but we know that those kits are loading up things that are good. So by looking at that good piece, I can start finding all these other phishing things that are out there. And we had a list of 6,000, and probably I would say 50% or more are bad that we've already identified. So this gives me that capability that I can go through and look at this. And one time I did this for Wells Fargo. I'll have to change that. But I'm looking at this AADCDN.net, and it just went through and said, dump everything that's here so I can show you that list. And then I went through and did some more analysis with a few others that were in the list so you can see that. So now you have two examples, one with a nice pivot pipeline that's very concise and very small, or I can use the RiskIQ analyzer and build these out where the data is cached and it goes through, and I can do these iterative searches on that information to be able to build this pipeline of threat intelligence creation that can leverage your organization to to extend detections and response to get that information. And then on the Sentinel side, you can use this to now go out and run playbooks automatically or enrich the information to be able to take the action appropriate based upon the information it knows, whether it's known bad or related to some sort of open source threat intelligence article or potentially even a vulnerability that was announced. And so I'll go back and I'll show you a slide. Let's go back in here and we can go through this. So we went through and we showed the Mystic piece. We just went through the analyzer piece. So the next step is, how can I use the vulnerability intelligence to help me out and to understand what Steve was showing us, that global view, but then bring it down to an organizational or third-party view. You need to be able to have that lens because there's so many pieces of intelligence that are published. You need to know, well, is that article or that thing something that I need to pay attention to? Will it affect me, my customers? Do I rely upon something that I'm not really aware of that maybe is in my infrastructure, that maybe there's a component that's being loaded that marketing put in place that I have no idea that has a vulnerability that can affect customers? You need to be able to have that perspective. So here's the scenario that I always like to do is like, because these are things that happen to me in real life. You have the CEO, CXO, somebody high up in the organization, and while they're going into work, they read an article, they read something, and they say, hey, this was pretty interesting. And they come in and they always go to the person that they rely upon, even though it might not be their job. It's the person that they've always had trust in, and they always knew that if they gave an assignment to them, they would run it down and get the information and get back to them. And they say, okay. And it's usually like a tier 3 person, tier 2, that somebody that's seasoned, that really knows what they're doing, and says, hey, I read this article. Are we affected by this? How big is this problem? And do we need to worry about it? And what about our third parties that we rely upon? Can you find out and let me know? And the person's like, yeah, and probably take them a day, 4 hours to a day to go through and figure it out. I'm going to show you how you can do it in minutes. So instead of doing that, you can quickly get the answer, go back to Reddit, finish your all of your articles you're reading, and then have the answer and give it to your boss. So here's a scenario. Somebody read about these top vulnerabilities that are affecting Linux systems, and they want to know, how does that relate to them? Okay, so we're going to go through now, and we're going to do this live and go through it. Okay, so give me a second. Just going to minimize this, and I'm going to bring up another window, and we're going to walk through this. Okay. So here's the article. And as we go through this article, we see this life array portal, and you go, well, that sounds familiar. So we're going to take this CVE, and we're going to do some analysis with it. Okay. So inside of RiskIQ, if I search for that word alone, life array, okay, all of a sudden it starts telling me about all the articles that ever mentioned this, okay, because we're bringing that in. Whether we created or somebody else did, or we added to somebody else's article, we're going to find those. So it's searching and finding anything related to that, okay? And we have one. So we have this article that's in here that says, leveraging newest vulnerabilities for creating a bot network. Kind of like what Steve was mentioning earlier, and you're like, huh, okay, it's interesting, but is it meaningful to me or things I rely upon? I don't really know. So we're going to go further. So when I get into the article, I can go and bring up information about this and bring up the actual article. So I can actually, bring up that original source of material, and I can read it and I can understand it and see what's happening and how it all works. So I have that available right at my fingertips immediately. Okay. Now, the other thing are the indicators that are in here. And so in the article, they might be inside of an image. They might be places where you might have to type them. Well, we have them all listed here for you. And we show like, hey, there was a domain that it talked to, and it talked about, the different parts of the attack it's going through. So all that's in here. So the next aspect is, hey, I want to go back and I want to look at the CVE. So if I take this CVE, and I'll show you. So I'll just bring this up real quick. If I search for any CVE, we immediately start giving you the CVE information, okay? And I'll explain some things on the screen, and then we'll go into greater detail to see how big it is in the world and whether I'm affected or others from the UI. And then we'll go into a notebook. And the reason why the notebook is good is because I can leverage that and search many CVEs at one time and get all the information, and it's very quick and repeatable. So inside of here, I can look to see, hey, it's this LifeRay portal in a community version. I can look to see if there was any deep and dark web talking about it. And from this list, I can immediately know, did I get any hits on the third parties that I've been monitoring? And I got a few hits already inside of here. So I go, oh, great. So I know this affects some of the third parties that I'm dealing with just from looking at the UI. I haven't drilled into anything yet, but I know that these organizations are running a version that we have a detection for that shows that, hey, they have it, okay? So now the next step is I can right click on this and open this up in another tab to get additional details. So this brings up another view. So this starts bringing in all the CV information that you would have to go out to multiple websites to gather and look and understand. But this is now from a single place where I can jump and get all these things. So a couple things show up that are really important to understand. Up in the corner, we have a risk IQ score, and then we have the CVSS2 and 3 score. The reason why we have our own score is because if there's somebody talking about that CVE and there's a known exploit out there, then that score is going to be higher because, hey, there's a proof of concept exploit, people are discussing it, so then that's going to make it that, hey, that's higher risk than something that there's a vulnerability for, but there's nothing published yet about that vulnerability. There's no exploit yet, but there's an active exploit, and there's all these things. So I can come in here, and if I want to see it, I can right-click just from here and go and look at that packet storm information to know about the exploit that's out there, okay? I could look in here and see the CWE. I can bring that up and jump right to it and get that information. So it's a nice jumping off point for any CVEs, okay? And I can also go in and look at any published information from the manufacturer about this. So I can go in here and go jump directly to those places where they are, okay? So this is really, really good, okay? And I can look and see right here in my own attack surface, I don't have this vulnerability. It's not listed there, okay? So I know I'm okay right now. We don't have it. But out of the 20 different third parties I'm looking at, I have 5 that have hits on these. So there's 5 organizations that have a hit, okay? Out of all the different ones I have here, okay? So I go, okay, so now I have 5 in here. So I can go through and I'm going to show you how you can do this in a notebook to make your life easier. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick one of these and we'll take a look at it. So this Fiat Chrysler. So I'm going to show you from here how we can get there. So I'm just going to look at my organizations and I'm going to bring up one that we're looking at. Now remember, all the data that we have is public data. It's like somebody walking down the street, looking at all the homes, looking in the windows from the outside and seeing what's open and having that information. So it's nothing that's internal to anything. It's all externally exposed public data that we're looking at. So we have the concept of the CVE, and then we have the insights. And the insights are a higher detection fidelity where we can do some checking to make sure that this is actually there. So if I drill into this one, we'll notice that we're listing out 64 insights that are highly critical. And Steve was mentioning about how we're looking at like remote code execution being very high on our list of monitoring and understanding. And now we're going through and we're looking at these particular ones, and I see one that is listed. And I can expand this out to get the more information about it, okay? Or I can drill into it. When I drill into it, I now see information about what we saw. What is the proof that we saw? And if inside of here, we can notice that it says, hey, if I'm running 6.2 or earlier, hey, I'm affected by this, and they're running 6.1. So I go, okay, this particular machine or this IP address has this running on it, and it's affected by it, okay? But if I wanted to go through and do this for every single one of the third parties, it's tedious. I have to go to each screen. I need to go and check that. So how can I do it across everybody at once, get done with it, get the results, and then I can even send this notebook to my third party and say, hey, these machines have this vulnerability. Here's my notebook, because when you save that notebook, all the data is in there as well. So I can just give them that entire notebook, and they can open it and see it. And if they need to run the queries, they can run the queries themselves. So now let's go into the notebook, okay? So I have a notebook here. It's not run. I have one that has already run. So I'll run this one so you can see it, and then we'll describe it, okay? So what I'm doing here is I'm bringing in pandas, and I'm saying, hey, you can bring up to 50,000 rows you can display, okay? Here I'm coming in and I'm starting up the analyzer. And now here's an example that I'm looking at 2 CVEs. I wanted to give you the example that you can have multiple CVEs, so I can check everything in that article at once if I wanted to, and find out what was there and who's affected, and do it one single time and not have to look for each individual ones in the UI. So one of these CVEs is an SMB version 1, and the other one is the LifeRay CVE. So now I'm gonna run this, okay, and I'll get some information in a second. It's loaded, and then I'm telling them I don't want to see certain domains, so I threw those out. So I'm looking at 3 different domains, and these all happen to be car manufacturers. Okay, so I get a count on each one of those, and now I'm going to run this one to see if there is any articles that were published on it, and I get an article information. I can actually go through and see, hey, that article talked about this information. Now I'm going to go across with that CVE and create a data frame out of it, find out which components are created with it, and then find out the impact. And so this is the impact just like we did before, but looking at through the article piece. And I'm going through and I'm running these. So this one I'm looking at just fiat, and I see that one IP address listed here, okay? Now, I wanted to give you the ability to look at something that might show up as an IP or as a domain. So I've listed those out here separately, and one of them is not going to have any results because it was only on the IP and not the domain. But I wanted to give you that example to see how to do it either way. And then I'm going through and I'm building out these different ways of saying, hey, I can look by the actual ID number in the system or by the name, okay? And these are all of the vulnerabilities, the insights that we have for this particular organization and the count associated with them. So you can actually be able to understand that. Now, with the CVEs that are defined on the top, I can go through and grab that information again, understand where it is, and then look at my own organization to say, apply that same search that you did for everyone else that you're monitoring as a third party, and bring those in to look at myself. And I don't have anything in my own infrastructure to look at, okay? So that's a way that I can look at this vulnerability, and I can go from a perspective like this. And this is one other area I didn't show you. So I can also go and run the query from the perspective of the actual vulnerability. So look at this. So I'm going to look for LifeRay. So I'm going to copy this, okay? Or even better, I'm just going to click on it. So when I click on it, it runs that query to show me everywhere in the world that we've seen this running, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the URL so we can look at all of the things that we found that have this in there. Okay, so hold on. Let's see if I edited the URL correctly. Okay. So what I just did was I ran a query to say, show me everywhere that LifeRay is and all the versions that are out there. So now I have the global view of where this is in the world. How widely used is this in the world? And inside of here, you can start seeing version numbers that are in here. And if I want to see everywhere in the world that version 6.6.1 is, I can actually click on it, okay? So when I click on it, that will query and show me that aspect. So I can get a global view of anything. And then I can also look at the organizational view and see, do I have it? What do I have? How do I look at it? And I'll show you that in a second. But now this is that large global view. Inside of the interface on the main screen are the attack surfaces. And I'll go through quickly, and I'm looking at my own to show what I have here. But we know what assets are here. We understand the web distribution that we're using, the web server distribution, the type that we're using, the frameworks, where we are hosted, where some things that are running, the age of certificates, reputation, and different things. So the information is highly useful for you to be able to filter this threat intelligence and look at it. So I'm going to pick a service provider real quick, just so you can see that filtering capability. And then this will be the last thing I'm going to show. One of the aspects is all of the vulnerability and exposure. So these are all of the publications that have come out where we've found something that's in here. I can look at the article, but I can also go directly to those counts of things and see which assets match that they're talking about. So this will immediately help you with customers to be able to understand if this affects them or not. Now, we also understand by looking at the internet all the ports that are being used and the banner information. So I can see which ones have, SSH, RDP open, VNC, all the different areas of a way that someone gets in. And this is without you having to go out there and scan them at all. We already have this data. And then the very bottom is the IP reputation, the reputation of those IP addresses associated with that organization and the things that we saw happening. And this is a service provider where people can rent space or use it that could be doing some bad stuff. In this case, there's a lot of credential harvesting, DDoS, some scanners, some command and control. And if I went into one of these and I clicked on it, I could see that breakdown of what we see here and what's happening and what's involved inside of here. So this gives me that capability where I can really dive in deep and understand the threats to an organization, whether it's an attack perspective or a vulnerability perspective or a port perspective, and to be able to do that across the internet, to know about you and others, good and bad, adversaries and allies. We can apply this to the bad guy as well and see all their threat infrastructure, all of their tooling at a global scale, which that threat intelligence can now be used as a way to protect the organization by bringing it into your internal systems and blocking access to those bad things. And so I'll bring up my final slides and we'll finish. So I invite you all to sign up for private previews. In the future, we'll be having a release that will be in a preview that we would love you to look at and give your feedback on. And then we do cyber threat workshops. We just finished our last campaign. We did 6. They're all 2 hours long. Each one is unique information, unique perspectives and ways to find the bad guys to make the internet a safer place and protect organizations. If you'd like to sign up for a free community account to start using the product today and kick the tires and play with it, you can go to community.riskiq.com/learn-more/illuminate. You can sign up for a free account and start an Illuminate trial where you can see your attack surface. Please use your corporate email address, because if you sign up with a Gmail account, we're not going to show you Google's attack surface. It's only on your corporate email addresses that we're going to do that. And with that, I'd like to thank you and turn it back over to Richard.
Thank you very much. Another fantastic session. I think if somebody wanted a deep dive, they came to the right day. Certainly what they got given out of this one, so thank you. Okay, we're in the final stretch. I know it's been a long day. We've had only a 10-minute break in the last maybe 4 hours or so, but we'll just bear with us for 5-10 minutes more while we just bring the speakers back on and have a roundtable. If you want to put questions in the Q&A, please do. And otherwise, I will come up with my own questions and I'll ask them some things that hopefully they don't squirm at when I ask the questions. Main one I'm going to start with. So I'm an identity person, and I'm still shocked by the lack of multi-factor authentication. It's been years, right? I've been talking about it for so long. So what I asked for you guys to answer for is, basically, of the information you have shared and the articles you've published, what are you most proud of? But also, maybe you want to throw in there, what are you still surprised at that, I don't know, if we could just hit that one button and change something, what do you think it would be? We'll start with Steve, if you've got any opinions on that one.
It's a good question. I think that's you're seeing that the drumbeat of multi-factor. And I agree with a lot of our visibility and a lot of the credential harvesting campaigns we see across our customer base and just on the internet. That can solve a lot of problems of these pages where people are just are getting tricked into giving up their credentials. And quite frankly, they keep getting better and better, right? It's long past there's definitely low-hanging fruit that is easy to spot, but actors are using and leveraging legitimate resources, infrastructure, capabilities in order to make their campaigns more effective against users. Lump in mobile, and there's all sorts of kind of issues that come into play that make it easier for them to conduct this. So I would echo your two-factor scenario, and I would say a lot of the stuff that we do in the background on the Risk IQ side is really try to create models to identify and service these things to our customers faster, and to put them in front of them so that they can defend the broader customer ecosystem and feed that information into block lists so that while those domains are malicious and impacting people, we can get them kind of into browser block lists and therefore ensure that we're stopping it at time of observation. And so I think outside of an article, I'm proud of the fact that in the background, Risk IQ is constantly churning through this data and using our intelligence to defend the broader ecosystem. And then as we get critical insight into these campaigns and actors, our intel analysts are constantly publishing on them to inform people of new tactics and techniques and to keep the industry abreast with what we're seeing.
Excellent, thank you. Michael, anything from you?
Yeah, to kind of mirror what Steve said, I mean, I work very closely with the press and keep an eye on cybersecurity headlines, and you see the same type of attacks over and over. It's just the infrastructure that changes, and Risk IQ does a tremendous job on keeping track of that infrastructure so that we can add context to these new attacks as they arise and kind of stay a step ahead, or at least neck and neck with threat actors as they change these things up.
Right. We'll never be out of a job, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's not one of those things we're going to say we're done, right? It keeps us all busy in a good and bad way. Thank you.
So I have one thing to mention. So I did a workshop, I think it was the last one or the one before, where my account was hacked, and I used Risk IQ to investigate it, and I used it as an example. So I was taking my son to school, and I just dropped him off in the parking lot, and I get this authenticator alert saying, you successfully logged in Minneapolis, Minnesota, even though I live in San Diego, California. And I'm in my car, and I'm like, oh no. So it says approve or deny, and I say deny. So at that point, I said, okay, I was 20 minutes from the house. I drove home, and I bring open my screen, and I start looking at the logs. So I look at the logs, and I see I had like 23 failed logins and one successful. And it was from Moldova, Russia, Ukraine. It was from all over Eastern Europe, Germany, and like Netherlands. I'm like, oh no. I go, what's happening with it? It was my personal email account. So I'm like, okay. So I looked inside of RiskIQ at those IP addresses, and I started looking at the web components, and they were all Microtech routers. So I went in and I searched on Microtech, and sure enough, they were part of the TrickBot proxy network. And so I was attacked through that network, and I made now a use case. But it was an article that we published talking about this vulnerability in those Microtech routers that Steve's group talked about, and then I was victim through that. So that was the coolest thing to say, wow, that's really cool to see that. But multi-factor can save me.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear when people adopt multi-factor, there's always the complaints about what it can and what it can't do and the issues and the raise around it. There's no argument that over 90+% of all attacks would be solved if we did it properly. It's just doing it properly. Which leads to the next one, which is this has been a very technical deep dive, and our audience is both customers and partners on this call. And also the recordings afterwards will be available to everybody. One of the things I wonder is, how does somebody who is so technical, who is going to love this toolkit, can't wait to get their hands on it, how do they sell up is the wrong word. How do they explain to CIO, CISO, CTO, like why invest in this? Why do this? Sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes it's not. So what do they get out of it? Do they get a dashboard? Do they get some insights? Do they get a smart email they can read? Like, what's your approach to help make sure that this isn't just another thing that Microsoft's come out with and you can buy it in whatever version we sell it in? It's like, no, this is actually something I seriously need for my day-to-day work. I'll open to the floor to see who wants to answer that one.
I'll kick it off. I'll kick it off for the group. I think that's a good question, right? There's a lot of technical capability, a lot of ways you can slice and dice the data that RiskIQ collects. I think I'd like to bring it back to some points that I was making earlier in my conversation, and what Benjamin was highlighting is really visibility. I think we sell it up the chain to the C-level and management, and visibility is key in reacting quickly to the changing threat environment. Whether that's a new vulnerability, a new threat actor, an alert inside of your SIM, you need context and understanding of what's taking place to make informed decisions. And so, RiskIQ tries to provide a broad swath of ways to provide that to the technical analysts. It's those articles that Benjamin was highlighting, to a manager or maybe a C-suite. It's our dashboard about the makeup and composition of your digital footprint and the areas where we see that are prone for attacks. For situational awareness, it's a daily or weekly digest email about the latest and greatest threats. And so, there's multiple ways to get that information, and that's a core focus of our team today and moving forward, of how do we bubble up the most important things an organization should pay attention to based on our broad data collection. So I would come back to visibility each time, and the visibility you need as an organization to effectively respond.
And with that, the visibility that we're surfacing is going to make all of the systems that you have today smarter, better detections. And then if there wasn't a detection, your hunting will be more successful, because you're going to be able to understand those unknowns. Everything is moving to the cloud. That's the life that we live in. And with that, understanding yourself and others, whether they're good or bad, is the bottom line. We need to be able to tell you those vulnerabilities, where they exist in the world, how they affect you, whether there's an active exploit with it or not, whether you have it or a component you're using or a third party has it. So then your organization is protected from being in the headlines of a breach or a security issue. That's how the CISO and the heads of the organization are going to stay protected, with the visibility and control to be able to understand where the threats are and applying those protections from the fingerprinting that we're doing to saying, these are the threat actors. If we know where they live, let's just not let them get into our neighborhoods. That's what we're trying to do, is to make the internet a safer place, empowering everybody to do more in their jobs by giving the tools and the capabilities to take action today outside and inside their systems.
Yeah, bringing it back to my domain a little bit. Sure, bringing it back. Sorry about that. Bringing it back to my domain a little bit. With the reporters and us enabling them with Passive Total and RiskIQ community, we make threat intelligence really usable and accessible because these reporters, they do want to be threat hunters. They want to be hands-on. The world is digital, so when they do reporting, this is the domain in which they have to do that reporting. So we make it extremely usable so that there's not that bad of a learning curve. Not saying that somebody can become an advanced threat hunter overnight, but it really does lower the barrier to entry for using this type of data to conduct threat investigations. And even with Benjamin's presentation with kind of these automated processes like Jupyter Notebooks on top of the data, it really closes that cyber skills gap and makes this really accessible to maybe junior analysts who can have the same output as senior analysts with these automated processes. So, again, it's just making these things easy and scalable.
Yeah. So the one thing to think about is you see the power that we have today, and we're not fully brought into Microsoft yet. That's our ultimate goal. Just imagine what is capable with the knowledge that we have on the outside, married with the vast knowledge of what Microsoft has on the inside, and how well protected your organization can be. So stay tuned, sign up for private previews, and hopefully you'll be happy with what the future shows.
Absolutely. Stay tuned. It's coming soon. Final one, and we'll end with this one, is what's next? Call to action. How do we get started? If I'm a customer, how do I do it? If I'm a partner, what do we want them to go do? Benjamin, I think I'll leave that one with you. What's next? What should we do to round out this day?
So for partners, they should reach out to Richard and John and the team to get that going. Sign up for a workshop. Get a free community account. Start using it. All the workshops are recorded. All of the URLs that we use are given. All of the notebooks that we use are published. So you can start taking this information, doing these examples, and then building upon that knowledge to become more proactive in your threat hunting and your creation of threat intelligence to apply it in all aspects of your organization.